Chapter 754. In the chapters written a few days ago, the Tang's second master was written as third master, mainly because I always wanted to make Tang 36 the third young master in the future. I admit my mistake. The manuscript has been changed. Also, I haven't applied for annual leave. Haha. Anyway, I'm just writing slowly, telling stories, and playing with everyone. As she imagined the Pope on the battlefield, Anhua's eyes slightly brightened, her heart filled with respect as she thought, truly extraordinary. As a member of the Orthodoxy, she was especially proud, and her mood was slightly disturbed. She did not notice that the eyes of the young array master on the sickbed had opened a small slit, revealing a very gloomy gaze. At this moment, the courtyard outside the window was slightly chaotic. The general had arrived at the sacred hospital, bringing with him a piece of news that was hard to verify. A place called Gaoyang Village might still have cinnabar pills. Why? Because the mysterious person who had refined the cinnabar pill was probably living there. The question that the entire continent wanted to know had suddenly been answered. For a moment, Ahua found it hard to accept. Even after she calmed down, she still found it hard to believe. But the young array master only had 7 days left to live, and the journey from the Mount Song Army headquarters to Gaoyang Village only required 3 days. At the very least, in terms of numbers, there was hope. She looked at the young array master with pity and said, "I want to see it, even if it's fake." Very far south from the Mount Song Army headquarters was Tianliang County, but the scenery in Hanqiu City was clearly much better. The only regret was that the famous manor outside the city could not be restored to its former glory. The cold-resistant willow trees grew again, and the land was covered in greenery. It looked like a grassland that had been eaten by sheep. 2 years ago, Zhu Luo had been beheaded by divine General Han Qing beneath the Mausoleum of Books. The Zhu clan and the emotion-severing sect had lost the protection of experts of the divine domain and were no longer as powerful as they once were. However, Tianliang County was still a place that the Zhu clan had managed for more than 1,000 years. The imperial court owed them a favor, and coupled with their close relationship with the Prince of Xiang's faction, no one in Tianliang County dared to oppose them, much less challenge the Zhu clan's position in Hanqiu City. However, Ji was clearly not in a good mood. As he gazed at the plains on both sides of the river, a hint of loathing and hatred appeared in his eyes. He was the current head of the emotion-severing sect and the head of the Zhu clan. It could be said that he had inherited most of Zhu Luo's inheritance. Everyone knew that he was not Zhu Luo's son, but his nephew, yet he was able to sit so stably on the position of Lord of Hanqiu City. From this, one could tell that he was definitely very strong, or at least very ruthless. I don't like to see thousands of miles of scorched earth, and I don't like to see these rotten plasters either. I have to think of a way to cure them. Zhu Yi raised the wine cup in his hand and gestured to the person across from him. If there's good medicine, I naturally don't mind putting in some effort. The one drinking with him was a general, his body exuding a powerful qi that clearly surpassed the upper level of star condensation. Mount Song's divine, General Ning Wei, had no background and had a wooden temperament. Back then, the divine empress had disliked him. So although he was powerful and skilled in military management, his ranking among the great Zhou's divine generals had never been high and his reputation was not prominent. It was only after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books that he received a decree and returned to the capital. After performing several major feats, he finally obtained the appreciation of the venerable Taoist and the Prince of Xiang. On the banks of the Luo River, when Xiao Zhang severed his arm and broke through, 2 divine generals had wanted to kill him, but they had been stopped by Xiao Zhang's spear. One of them had been him. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that he had to bear the responsibility for his failure and be forced to leave the capital, coming to the Mount Song Army headquarters. The Mount Song Army headquarters was naturally much stronger than his previous army headquarters. He knew that this was the imperial court's reward for him, but he was still not satisfied. If the Tang's second master had not clearly expressed his dissatisfaction with him to the venerable Taoist, he would have remained in the capital in an even more important position, such as replacing Su Shiji. In the 2 years he had spent in the Mount Song Army headquarters, He had thought about many things, so he very quickly understood the meaning behind Zhu Ye's somewhat cryptic words. This pill could regrow bones and cure the dying, so it could naturally be like a spring breeze, turning the scorched myriad willows garden green once more. Zhu Yi naturally would not actually use this medicine to make water or irrigate the ground. This was just a description, a very fitting one. Ning Shiwei wanted this medicine as a stepping stone for his advancement, and the Zhu clan also wanted this medicine to restore the might of the clan. So why not work together? The imperial court has already yielded enough to the Tang clan. Those Shui merchants are getting more and more arrogant and willful, somewhat lacking sense of propriety. They truly do need to be taught a lesson. He added, I will send people. If Sect Master is interested, you can have him go with you. Zhu Yi put down his wine cup and very casually said, I will personally go. Ning Shiwei realized that this matter was even more important than he had imagined. If not for the urgency of the war, he would probably have gone to that small village to take a look. I'll also go and see. A voice rang out from the side. The speaker was a young master, waving his folding fan in the chilly weather, causing his originally handsome face to seem a little cold. Although I don't believe that this medicine is as important as you say, I'm still very curious. The young man was called Tianhai Zhani, the state of Ping's younger brother, the brother-in-law of Prince Chenlu, and Prince Chenlu was the Princess Yang's son. The relationship between the Tianhai clan and the Zhu clan had always been terrible, like fire and water. Zhu Luo not going to the capital had even become a proverb of the great Zhou dynasty. But just as it was said, that time changes and the situation changes. Now that the divine empress was dead and Zhu Luo was dead, the wariness and hatred of the past had become insignificant. The hidden fear of the divine empress had allowed them to join hands through the Prince of Xi'an. Zhu Yi smiled at Tianhai Zhani, but said nothing. Everyone knew that the authority and resources of the Tianhai clan would ultimately fall into the hands of Tianhai Xingxue or Tianhai Zhani. Compared to Tianhai Xingxue, who had won the admiration of many important ministers of the military, Ning Shiwei deeply disliked Tianhai Zhani. This young man was too gloomy, too cold. Perhaps it was for this reason that he did not refuse. He asked, Your Highness, have you already confirmed that it is not that person? Tianhai Zhani closed his folding fan and lightly tapped it against his palm. With a smirk, he said, Could it be that you're afraid? Your Highness said that that person should be in the south. But I'm different from all of you. If this medicine really is related to that person, I truly hope that I can see his figure there. He did not finish his words, but rose and left. As he watched his figure gradually vanish into the setting sun and the withered willows, Zhu Yi said, If you walk too fast, it's easy for something to happen. On the battlefield, young people like him always die very quickly, and I'm no longer young. Ning Shiwei continued, So I don't know anything. I only know that there's a young array master who's not far from death. Now that someone suddenly knows the whereabouts of the cinnabar pill, they'll naturally think of a way to find it. Correct. If he can survive, it's naturally for the best. General truly treats his soldiers like children. Everything is a reward from the lords of the imperial court. On the map, Gaoyang village was a small dot in the mountains of the snowy plains. In the records, Gaoyang village was a military fort that had long since been abandoned. However, when Hua and the others arrived, they realized that this small dot on the map was actually a large expanse of ancient buildings at the base of the snowy mountains, and the village was still rather lively. The revival of Gaoyang village was entirely due to the war between the humans and the demons. Because of the frequent battles on the northern edge of the snowy plains, the majority of the transportation of armaments from the northeast to Tianliang County now chose to pass through the reopened mountain roads, and the exit of this road that traversed Mount Han just so happened to be in Gaoyang village. Gaoyang village was currently truly very lively, even bustling. The streets were filled with soldiers and peddlers, and one could even see many women in heavy makeup. If a place had a brothel, there would naturally be an inn. The leading officer lifted the young array master on a stretcher into the rear courtyard, and Hua brought 2 female students to the second floor of the inn, intending to order some food and also inquire about a few things. But before they could sit down, their gazes were attracted by a father and daughter on the second floor. They were a father and daughter who were selling their music. The father was dressed in the old clothes of a scholar and held a zither in his bosom. His head was lowered, making it impossible to see his face. The daughter was around 12 or 13 years old. Her appearance was elegant and beautiful, but there was a hint of childishness to it. The distance between her eyes was rather wide, giving her a rather simple-minded appearance. Chapter 755. And Hua had noticed this father and daughter pair because she had noticed that there was something strange about them from a few details. The zither master's clothes were very old, and there were no signs of frequent washing, but they were abnormally clean. What was even stranger was that there was snow drifting all around Gaoyang village, and the streets were muddy, but there was not a speck of mud on his shoes. They looked brand new. And there was also the beautiful girl. She did not have the timidity or self-pity of a normal singing girl. She just quietly sat in the corner of the room, her head slightly raised and her eyes somewhat wooden. This was because the indifference on her face could also be understood as disdain for everything around her. In short, she gave off a sense of alienation from the world. This was not a normal father and daughter pair, at least not a common father and daughter pair. And Hua had just thought of this when the clear and moving sound of the zither rose from the middle-aged scholar's fingers. It did not stop flowing like water. What followed was the girl's singing. The girl's voice was very pleasant to listen to, but her pronunciation was rather unique. At the end of the sound, the tip of her tongue would curl up as if she was swallowing back a part of the syllable. However, it did not sound unclear, nor did it make one feel bored or bored. On the contrary, it was like a peerless beauty behind a curtain of beads. And Hua had lived in the capital for a long time and had heard many wonderful songs, but she had never heard a song like this. Unexpectedly, she became immersed in it, temporarily forgetting the strange feeling in her heart. After the song ended, the second floor of the inn fell silent for a long time before applause and sighs of praise rang out. The applause and sighs of praise were not particularly enthusiastic, not because the crowd felt that this father and daughter pair had not sung well, but because, like in Hua, they found the song unforgettable and could not bear to interrupt it with applause. The father and daughter did not rise to return the greeting, nor did they express their gratitude. They did not even take the money. They just quietly sat in the corner of the room. The father adjusted the zither while the girl remained expressionless. And Hua ordered a maid to bring the girl over, wanting to ask her a few questions. The girl ignored her and continued to stare out the window, her eyes somewhat unfocused. And Hua was somewhat depressed, but she had a gentle personality and did not take offense. She called over a waiter and asked him a few questions. Only then did she learn that this father and daughter pair had only arrived at Gaoyang village yesterday. The father was a mute, and the daughter had some problems as well. It seemed that she had some kind of strange illness. And Hua stood up and walked to the corner of the room. She smiled at the mute zither player, then squatted down in front of the girl and took her hand. She was an instructor of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and was highly skilled in both the sacred light technique and the art of healing. With just a simple grasp of his hand, her fingers had already finished taking his pulse. Feeling the pulse from her fingertips, she frowned slightly. She found that there was indeed a problem with the little girl's body, and it was very complicated. It was very likely that the little girl's sense of perception had been greatly damaged. She looked up at the little girl. The little girl was still looking out of the window, and Hua's gaze fell on the girl's profile. Apart from the fact that the space between the young lady's eyes was a bit wide, there was no other problem to be found. She was very good-looking, and could even be said to be very beautiful. Such a beautiful little person, but a little silly, what a pity. Hua felt a great deal of pity for this girl. She took a pouch from her sleeve and prepared to slip it to her. There were some pieces of silver in the pouch. At this moment, the girl withdrew her gaze from the window and looked at Hua. Several breaths of time had passed since Hua had taken her hand. The girl's reaction truly did seem rather slow. But Hua would no longer think this way, or perhaps she would not dare to think this way, because she saw the girl's eyes. At such a close distance, she finally understood. The girl's eyes were not dull, only calm. Her aura was not one of alienation, but one of pride that was deeply rooted in her bones. Other than the drifting snow, there was no other person or thing in the world that could disturb the lake of her heart and disturb her calm. Upon seeing the girl's eyes, Anhua suddenly felt like all the snow outside the window had surged in, piercing through her clothes and flesh to land on her sea of consciousness. It was like a blade of grass seeing an endless snowstorm, like an ant seeing a giant. Her body became incomparably cold and stiff. She could not even move a finger. She even felt like her sea of consciousness would be frozen into ice in the next moment, and then she would silently die. At this moment, the girl saw the pouch in Anhua's hand. The girl very slowly nodded, her movements so subtle that if one did not look carefully, it would be impossible to notice. Then, she turned her head to look out the window once more. The furious snowstorm stopped, the giant's indifferent gaze vanished, and Anhua finally felt that smear of warmth in the real world. Her body was no longer stiff, and she could move. Not daring to linger any longer, she led her maid down the stairs. When she reached the bottom floor, she realized that her clothes were completely drenched in sweat. Anhua did not tell this matter to anyone, not even the general leading the group or the steward of the sacred hospital, surnamed Yang. This was because she had an intense understanding that she had almost died from discovering a certain secret. Now that she had survived, she should continue to keep this matter secret. This was the girl's silent request of her. Because of her fear, when she returned to the rear courtyard and heard the general say that it would be best to immediately depart, she had no objections, only asked a few questions. Have you confirmed the exact location? The army headquarters has already sent people to investigate the whereabouts of the herbs for 2 days. There should be no mistake. There was a medicine shop in Gaoyang village. According to the reports of the scouts, many herbs would be transported to this medicine shop, and then in the middle of the night, they would be transported out of the city, their whereabouts unknown. It was obvious that the owner of the cinnabar pill had chosen Gaoyang village because it was convenient to travel here, and they could obtain any medicine they wanted. On the afternoon of the same day, the general, Anhua, Sir Yang, and several dozen soldiers set out with their maids and the young array master on a stretcher in search of a doctor. After leaving Gaoyang village, they deviated from the official and military roads and set out into the depths of Mount Han. The snow on the road gradually deepened and it was no longer muddy, but it was similarly difficult to travel. The deeper they went into the mountains, the more quiet and beautiful it was. Amidst the pines, one could faintly see the steam of a hot spring. If not for the war, this place would have long since become a famous scenic spot. The warmth of dusk completely vanished and night descended. Under the cover of the starlight, the group arduously advanced. At some point, they finally reached their destination. There was a small courtyard deep in Mount Han. The courtyard was surrounded by running water, steam rising from it, most likely drawn from the hot spring. Because of the heat of the earth, even though it was winter, the area around the small courtyard was still exuberant. Based on the distance from the hot spring, the 4 seasons naturally formed. There was a lush bamboo forest by the wall of the courtyard, flowers in full bloom in front of the courtyard, and trees shedding their leaves in front of the half-arched window. Of course, the vast majority of places were still cold and frozen, like that small lake, which was covered in snow. There was a pavilion on the lake, surrounded by curtains. 2 figures could be faintly seen within. A gust of wind lifted up a corner of the curtain. There was a fire in the pavilion and several plum blossoms. A man and a little girl sat across from each other by the fire. The girl had a childish face and was dressed in black, her entire body exuding a cold aura. The man was not very old, and his eyes were clean. Neither snow nor plum blossoms could compare. Last year's New Year's Eve was also updated, just for fun and to avoid the awkwardness brought on by television. Last year's New Year's Eve chapter was very awesome. It was Chen Changshang shouting in the spring light of Xuanyang City that Su Li is here. This year's chapter is also very interesting. It writes about 2 of the most terrifying girls in choosing heaven, and the male lead has finally appeared once more. I don't want to use playing house and drinking wine to describe the chapter's title because this chapter doesn't mention it, but it's actually a very good title. Also, I very seriously wish everyone a happy new year and the health of your entire family. P.S. This chapter's title is actually not particularly suitable. It's just that it's been 10 years since I've written that chapter, and I miss it a little. I really will write that again, not a continuation, but a rewrite. Chapter 756. In a cold and snowy night, in a pavilion, on a green plum stove, sitting across from each other and drinking tea, it was a scene that exuded elegance and extraordinariness. In the past few days, Anhua had imagined many things about that otherworldly master who had saved countless lives. Now that she saw the scene on the lake, she felt that this was exactly how it should be. At this moment, the young man in the pavilion raised a cup of wine in his hand and took a small sip. The breeze lifted the curtains and also carried the taste of the cup. Everyone was surprised, as they could tell that this was not tea, but wine. Drinking wine on a snowy night is also an elegant affair, Ahua thought to herself. She respectfully bowed to the pavilion, but when she raised her head and prepared to speak, she realized that the young man had disappeared. The black-clothed girl had also left the table and come to the railing. Her gaze was fixed on the shore of the lake. It seemed like she was looking at Anhua's party, but it also seemed like she was looking at an even more distant place. In the faint light of the snowy night and the mist of the lake, the girl's face became a little clearer, yet even more indistinct. She still had a childish air, but she was cold and dazzling, dreamlike and illusory, like a mountain spirit. In such a desolate mountain, on a cold, snowy night, encountering such a beautiful garden and such a cold and aloof young girl, anyone would easily associate it with certain legends. Even Anhua, who had grown up in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and had a clear Tao heart, couldn't help but be dazed for a moment, even feel an inexplicable fear. But she would not leave, because the young array master was still lying on the stretcher, ready to die at any moment. The others would also not leave, because they had not obtained what they wanted to obtain. Let's go over first, the general said with a frown. This journey to seek medical advice would naturally not go too smoothly, because it was obvious that the master of the Cinnabar pill did not want her true identity to be discovered. The squad from the Mount Song Army headquarters stepped onto the wooden bridge over the lake, their somewhat disorderly footsteps shattering the silence. The black-clothed girl seemed unaware. She looked at a certain place in the night sky, her beautiful and cold face devoid of emotion. Using the dim starlight and lantern light, Anhua noticed that there were many tiny bubbles roiling in the lake under the bridge. When they burst, they condensed into a mist that covered the surface of the lake. The mist was filled with moisture and warmth. It was obvious that this lake was formed from the condensation of hot springs, and there was even a crack in the ground at the bottom of the lake. When everyone entered the pavilion, the black-clothed girl still did not turn around. She was still looking out the railing, as if these uninvited guests did not disturb her mood of drinking on a snowy night. Or perhaps these people did not exist in her eyes at all, even though they had already arrived in front of her. Anhua was about to bow again when she suddenly smelled something and subconsciously turned to the clay stove. Her body trembled, and an expression of disbelief appeared on her face. The clay stove was very delicate, no more than a foot long. It didn't seem out of place when placed on the table. A clay bowl was placed on top of the stove, and the bubbling sound of the bowl was similar to the lake water outside the pavilion. The wine was in a small pot carved with plum blossoms, steeped in the cold wind and snow. So this was not warming the wine, nor was it brewing tea, but stewing meat. A pot of braised lamb was being stewed on the clay stove. Compared to the scene of stewing tea on a snowy night, this was admittedly lacking in elegance, but it was not enough to shock Anhua so much. The reason she was shocked, the reason she couldn't help but reveal a pained expression on her face, was because she could clearly smell that this pot of braised lamb contained the scent of many medicinal ingredients. Angelica, wolfberry, clove, immortal grass, epimedium. She could smell a few medicinal ingredients in this pot of lamb, and these were all smells that she had once smelled from a certain pill. The new medical officer of the sacred hospital, Sir Yang, also had an extremely nasty complexion. This was because his true identity was Sir Yang, a guardian of the Tang clan's medicine store in Wenshui City. He had once personally dissected that pill. He was extremely confident that the 34 medicinal ingredients mixed into the pot of lamb stewing on the stove were the ingredients needed to make the cinnabar pill. He once more turned to the black-clothed girl by the railing and narrowed his eyes, sharp as blades, carrying a bone-chilling hostility and rage. It was as if those words had been squeezed through his teeth. Truly extravagant and extravagant. To be able to have such a beautiful garden and pavilion in such a remote mountain in the middle of winter, the owner was naturally no ordinary clan, no ordinary wealthy clan. But none of this was as shocking as this pot of braised lamb. What's wrong? The general noticed the strange expressions on the faces of the two and sternly asked. Before Hua had time to do anything, Sir Yang rushed to the table and used his chopsticks to flip over the leftover braised lamb in the pot. He then poured a cup of wine and brought it to his nose to take a sniff. With just a sniff, Sir Yang's face turned red, the same color as the lamb in the pot. He was not drunk, but angry. He was so angry that his body began to tremble and the wine in his cup spilled out, just like the angry question that followed. What a reckless waste of a heavenly treasure. This is something used to save lives, but you actually used it to stew meat and make wine. The crowd finally understood and couldn't help but be stunned. The general's face became even more gloomy, and some people stared at the lamb and wine pot on the table, their eyes beginning to glow. And Hua had already awoken from her shock, but she still felt a great deal of heartache, but she felt even more disappointment and sorrow. After learning of the cinnabar pill, she had made far too many conjectures about that mysterious medical expert. She had always felt that he was an otherworldly expert who disregarded fame and profit, but an incomparably precious medicine that could allow soldiers on the front lines to escape death and pain. Was it really so insignificant to that person? The cinnabar pill was not a miracle that he had painstakingly created to save the common people, but a game that he was playing in this world. He was just like a child, playing house, but the people watching from the side were actually taking it seriously. Then wasn't the value that the common people placed on the cinnabar pill and the adoration that people like her held for him particularly laughable in his eyes? Fine, even if this was just a game, it was still a matter of life and death to ordinary people like her who lived in the mortal world. And Hua inwardly sighed helplessly, concealing her sorrow. She asked the black-clothed girl, "May I ask if you are the master of the cinnabar pill?" The black-clothed girl turned around, but she did not answer her question. Instead, she looked at Master Yang. When Master Yang realized that the bowl of lamb and the pot of wine were both highly likely to contain the cinnabar pill, his emotions had been completely consumed by anger and absurdity, so he did not notice her gaze. No one could see the black-clothed girl's emotions. Her young and elegant face was forever devoid of emotion, like an ancient block of ice. Her voice was similarly cold, but the meaning expressed was completely different from ice. It was brimming with passion, even a little berserk, and of course, it was still incredibly absurd. Your filthy hands actually dared to touch my sacred and inviolable wine and meat. This is truly a matter worthy of praise. Everyone, including Hua, was stunned, not understanding what she meant. Master Yang finally came to his senses and looked over in shock. The black-clothed girl's eyes were extremely bright as she said, "It's been a very long time since I've eaten human meat. Thank you for giving me such a perfect reason. Greetings to everyone for the new year. This is the first chapter of the new year. It mainly talks about eating meat. Tomorrow, I'll talk about how to get rid of the grease and protect the stomach, haha." Chapter 757. Other than the demons, no one would eat human flesh. Even if there was such a freak, they would only do it in private. They would never dare to announce it to the public, much less have such a proud expression on their faces. The black-clothed girl's words were very absurd and sounded like a joke. Logically speaking, it could only be a joke, but the people in the pavilion could not find it in themselves to laugh. This was because this place was deep in the mountains, far away from the mortal world, on a lake on a cold winter night. This was a place where strange stories were most likely to occur, and she had a very serious expression. An atmosphere of fear and unease enveloped the pavilion, occupying everyone's minds. Shame could easily make a person angry, but fear could as well, because both forced one to confront one's mental weakness. That Sir Yang had originally wanted to say a few words of explanation, but when he spoke, his words turned into angry rebuke from shame. Am I wrong? These medicines can save lives, but they're being used by you to satisfy your appetites. What you eat is human flesh. What you drink is human blood. What you say is naturally correct. The black-clothed girl's childish face became cold. Because I have always eaten human flesh and drank human blood. As she spoke, a howl of pain rose from the pavilion. Sir Yang's hand had been severed at the wrist. With a cry of panic and a string of crystalline beads of blood flying into the night sky, the severed hand was controlled by an invisible energy and floated to the black-clothed girl. She looked at the severed hand and slightly arched her brow. She did not move for the moment, her thoughts inscrutable. The crowd stared in horror at this bloody sight, thinking, will she really eat that severed hand? And Hua noticed that the black-clothed girl had an abnormally serious expression, cautious and focused, even seeming to have a divine aura. This discovery filled her with boundless fear and made her body abnormally cold, because it made her think of the girl she had seen in the tavern at Gaoyang village. Stop messing around. A voice came from the shore of the lake. The young man who had suddenly vanished walked back from the bridge. The appearance of this person caused the oppressive, tense, and fearful atmosphere in the pavilion to inexplicably relax. Perhaps it was because of his gentle tone, or perhaps it was because his clean and delicate face gave off a harmless feeling. The black-clothed girl angrily said, "How was I messing around? That's the braised mutton you made for me. How am I supposed to eat it after that guy's dirty hands touched it?" The young man came out of the pavilion, looked at her, and said, "Are you going to bite his hand just because of this?" The girl in black said angrily, "I don't care. I want to eat human flesh. I eat human flesh anyway, so why can't I?" The young man said helplessly, "You tried it 2 years ago. You don't like it. Why are you still thinking about it?" The girl in black snorted and said, "If I can't eat human flesh, would I still be me? Be good. You said that this hand is very dirty. Quickly throw it away." The young man said to her. There was a hint of pampering in his voice, but more of helplessness, care, responsibility, and obligation. It was like a senior talking to a junior, but strangely, there was a hint of fear. This conversation was also very strange. When had eating human flesh ever been brought up to the table to be discussed? Of course, everyone thought it was ridiculous, but apart from Mr. Yang, who was about to faint from the pain, everyone hoped that this young man could convince the girl in black. No one wanted to have nightmares every night for the rest of their lives. The black-clothed girl was clearly very unhappy, but in the end, she still obeyed and threw the severed hand into the lake. The crowd finally sighed in relief at this sight. "I know what you want, but I really can't give it to you." In addition, the young man's gaze fell on Hua's face as he said, "The lamb bowl and wine pot truly do have medicinal ingredients, but they are not what you want." And Hua had already confirmed that he was the master of the cinnabar pill and was confused as to why he would speak to her out of all these people. The young man continued, "I'm not that extravagant of a person. If this meat and wine can save people, I naturally won't use them to satisfy my own appetite." And Hua felt even more confused. This person was assuredly no ordinary person, and there was no need for him to explain anything to an ordinary teacher of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. But when she saw the painfully groaning Mr. Yang, her confusion was replaced by sorrow. But in the end, you are still powerful figures who disregard the lives and deaths of ordinary people. The young man gazed at her serious and stubborn expression and became slightly dazed. He was probably thinking of a girl who had once cultivated in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green. Perhaps it was for this reason that he wanted to give an explanation. "You are a pure healer. You are a true soldier." He looked at Hua and the general and said, "But this person is different. He is not an ordinary doctor. I can see his greed, so a broken hand is the price he needs to pay." Just like his previous explanation, there was no evidence, and it was based on his own judgment, making it very difficult to believe. But when they saw the young man's clear and clean eyes, and Hua and the general believed him, the young man regretfully said, "I didn't think that I would be found so quickly." The mood in the pavilion once more grew tense. Everyone gripped their sabers and crossbows, their breathing a little hurried as they wondered, is this person planning to silence us? If they had not seen the black-clothed girl silently cut off Mr. Yang's wrist, they might have laughed at this idea as wishful thinking, but no one dared to think this. Yet the young man did nothing. He only called the black-clothed girl out of the pavilion and then turned to walk back to the bridge. Only now did everyone notice that he had been carrying a bag this entire time. It turned out that he had been making preparations for his departure when he had vanished. And Hua was still a woman, so her thoughts were more meticulous and her thoughts were more complex. If they had packed their bags in such a short time, did this mean that they were preparing to leave at any moment? What was he hiding from? Was it the world-renowned reputation, extraordinary riches, and endless danger brought by the cinnabar pill? Or was it the world itself? Just who was this young man? What sort of story did he have? The general had come with military orders, so he was naturally unwilling to let the other party leave. With a shout, he charged out of the pavilion. With a boom, dust flew up from the pavilion. He was blocked by an invisible barrier and jolted to the ground. The crowd finally realized that the other party had laid down a seal in the pavilion before leaving. Perhaps there was no danger, but it made it impossible for them to stop their departure. And Hua walked to the edge of the pavilion and shouted at the backs of the two, "We just want to ask for a cinnabar pill to save our lives." The young man did not turn around. "I really don't have any more. The next batch will be in a few days. Go back and wait." And Hua somewhat despondently shouted, "But he can't wait any longer. There are many things that we cannot decide for ourselves. We can only resign ourselves to fate." The young man continued to lead the black-clothed girl to the end of the wooden bridge, talking along the way. "In the future, don't make trouble out of nothing. When was I making trouble out of nothing? Then can you not be so tyrannical? Killing and eating people at the slightest provocation is really not good. Those people came to steal something. They might even want to attack you, so I naturally had to kill them. If I could kill them, what's the big deal about eating them while I'm at it? I know that you also don't want to eat them, so why force yourself? When did I ever say that I didn't want to eat human flesh? Wasn't it just because you had a point? That hand was too dirty, and it was too troublesome to wash it and pluck the hair. I was just giving you a way out so that it would be easier for you to come down. Hey, if you say that, aren't you putting me on a ladder again? And besides, please understand that I was giving you face." As they listened to this conversation and watched the gradually fading figures, the people in the pavilion all felt very complex emotions. Just when they thought that everything that had happened tonight would become a memory, an unforgettable cold dream that would disappear without a trace in their lives, suddenly, the starlight and snow in the sky suddenly began to madly dance. A massive rock howled down from the sky and smashed against the wooden bridge. The lake water roiled, waves surged, splinters of wood flew, dust and snow obscured the entire sky. The wooden bridge was broken and the lake was thrown into chaos. The young man and the black-clothed girl stood by the broken bridge, their clothes slightly wet. The silence was particularly oppressive. Suddenly, there was the howl of wind. It was the cold wind blowing at the embers. Then there was the sound of metal grinding against metal and the clashing of armor. Countless torches were lit by the lake, gradually illuminating the scene. There were people everywhere. Chapter 758. It turned out that so many people had been hidden around the lake. Since they were hidden, it naturally meant that these people had arrived a long time ago. These people had come from Gaoyang Village, Xuanyang City, the Mount Song Army Headquarters, Hanqiu City, and even the capital. They were all experts, but they were only the attendants of the truly important figures. These important figures had been standing in the darkness between the mountains this entire time. Tianhai Zhani was dressed in a thin robe, the snowflakes drifting away as they fell upon it. Young people always liked to use various methods to display their demeanor and boast about their cultivation. But as the master of the Zhu clan, Zhu Yi did not need to do this. He was dressed in an extremely expensive fur coat, and divine General Ning Wei was still fully armored in this frigid weather, appearing particularly austere. He looked down at the misty courtyard at the bottom of the valley, which seemed like a fairyland, and frowned. This place is so desolate and so close to the land of demons, but someone actually managed to build such a place. It's not important who owns this place. What's important is who will be able to own that person after tonight. Tianhai Zhani glanced across the pine forest, making no attempt to conceal his derision and contempt. Even the stupidest of people could imagine that the mysterious master who could refine a wondrous treasure like the cinnabar pill was no ordinary person. But they represented the Zhu clan, the Tianhai clan, and the Prince of Xiang, equivalent to half the Great Zhou dynasty. What they needed to consider was not how to seize the precious recipe or the even more important person, but how to prevent others from seizing it. Those people were right across from the pine forest. The Tang's 17th master smirked at them and said, "I truly didn't expect that someone would dare to steal the goods of my Wenshui Tangs." It seemed that the Tang clan had already lost control of the situation tonight. Even though he had made preparations, he probably had not expected that the important figures of the imperial court would place such importance on that person and the recipe. Even someone of Zhu Ye's and Ning Shiwei's status had managed to stealthily infiltrate this nameless mountain range. Tianhai Zhani looked at the experts of the Tang clan and jeered. If your Tang clan continued to obediently distribute the cinnabar pill like it did in the past, then it truly could be said to be your goods. But now that you yourselves want to seize the treasure, do you still have the face to stop others? Embezzlement, that sounds even worse. The Tang's 17th master's smile faded. I am speaking to you on behalf of the Tang clan. Ever since they had met in the snowy mountains, Zhu Yi had always had a faint smile on his face. When he heard these words, his smile suddenly blossomed. When your second brother poisons your eldest brother to death and then enters the ancestral hall to kill pitiful little 36, it won't be too late for you to say that you represent the Tang clan on that day. Hearing these seemingly ordinary but actually sharp and contemptuous words, the Tang's 17th master took in a deep breath, his eyes turning cold. This was Tianliang County, and he was neither the first master nor the second master. In fact, his status in the Tang clan was even lower than Tang's. He could only agree to these words, but right at this moment, Ning Shiwei suddenly turned around and looked at the courtyard in the snowy gorge below. He grunted and said, "You want to leave?" Before his voice faded away, his fist, which carried the taste of cold iron, heavily bombarded the cliff. With a loud sound, a mountain rock was sent flying and fell down. The faint sound of collapsing could be heard from the valley. The lake seemed to ripple as the wooden bridge snapped. "Go, let's go meet the master of this place." Ning Shiwei walked toward the lake, not even glancing at the Tang's 17th master. But the Tang's 17th master knew that this steely fist was actually meant for him to see. This was a warning and also a display of resolve. Tianhai Zhani shook his head, his face brimming with derision, and walked past him. Zhu Yi calmly nodded his head in greeting and also left. The former bishop of the Hall of Heroic Marshal glanced at the motionless Tang 17th master, somewhat worried and somewhat confused. As he watched the torches around the distant lake light up and the mist thickening as the lake surged, the Tang's 17th master suddenly creased his brow. The rocks smashed apart the wooden bridge, startled the lake, and stirred up a great mist. The courtyard, which existed in all four seasons, was shrouded in mist. The dusky light released by the countless torches was scattered into an extremely dreamy scene, even more immortal than before. Of course, in the eyes of people with different moods, it could also be said to be rather strange. Tianhai Zhani stood by the lake, gazing at the two indistinct figures on the broken bridge in the mist. Arching his brows, he said, "Sire is naturally an extraordinary person, a solitary cloud and wild crane, a master beyond the world, but how can you truly be above the mundane world? Since you will sooner or later enter the world of mortals, why not travel with us?" He found these words to be extremely elegant and rather satisfied, but the answer from the mist indicated that it had not achieved the effect he had hoped for. The black-clothed girl's voice was just as emotionless as her person, yet could easily stir the emotions of others. "You're a demi-human? You don't know how to speak human language?" Tian Haijani was enraged by these words. With a snort, he prepared to do something, but Zhu Yi stopped him with a glance. "It's a little simpler. Regardless of what you think, since you've seen the sun, there's no possibility of returning tonight." Zhu Yi calmly looked at the two people in the mist and said, "No one can take the cinnabar pill for themselves. Not the Tang clan, not me, not anyone. This is the imperial courts, and we only want the merit of being the first to offer it. As for your reward, not a single cent will be given to you. You might even receive the venerable Taoist's appreciation." The mist was quiet for a very long time. The young man's voice rang out. "This is mine." Zhu Yi gave a gentle smile, like a teacher patiently explaining to a junior. "I said that no one can take it, including everyone in the mist, including you." The young man in the mist asked, "What sort of principle is this?" Zhu Yi solemnly replied, "Since it's the supreme treasure of the world, it should belong to the world." The mist fell silent once more. Tian Haijani sneered, "If you have a precious treasure but are not willing to share it with the world, you should hide it even more secretively, or else you will die." Whether it was spoken elegantly, tactfully, or patiently, the principles of powerful figures had always been very clear. The cinnabar pill was the supreme treasure of the world. If one did not have the corresponding strength or authority, they had no right to keep it. If one wanted to keep it, they could only die. The black-clothed girl's voice once more rang out from the mist. This was her reply to Tian Haijani. "Ah, are you really a demi-human?" It was still that joke about not knowing how to speak properly. Tian Haijani was enraged and harshly yelled, "Hand over the pill formula, and I'll spare your life." As he said this, he secretly made a hand gesture behind his back. He had no intention of waiting for an answer. What he wanted was a sudden attack. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei both saw this and raised their brows, but they did not stop him. They also wanted to see what would happen. Even if it was just a probe, there would at least be some response. An expert of the Tianhai clan noiselessly swept across the lake, strangely vanishing into the mist. And then he simply vanished. Nothing happened. Not a single sound rang out. Time slowly passed, but the mist remained quiet, with no response. Everyone felt that this was truly strange. Tian Haijani's complexion turned abnormally nasty. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei's expressions turned solemn. Suddenly, there was the sound of water. The lotus leaves in the mist moved, and the corpse of the Tianhai clan expert floated out. It was like a boat. Wherever it passed, the lake water would gradually be dyed in a dazzling dark red. Chapter 759. As he gazed at the corpse gently drifting in the lake, Tian Haijani's face instantly paled, as white as paper or as white as snow, becoming more and more similar to his more famous older brother. This did not mean that he was afraid, but that he was angry. Again, he harshly yelled as he looked at the indistinct figures in the mist. The sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. This time, without any concealment, several experts of the Tianhai clan leapt over the lakeshore and entered the thick fog. This time, there was finally a response, and it quickly arrived. It was a light sound, like a leather bag filled with water being pierced by a sharp arrow. Plap, plap, plap. Several experts of the Tianhai clan were still in the air when they shattered, transforming into innumerable lumps of flesh that fell to the ground. The lake was instantly dyed, even redder, and the waves were restless. The mist showed no signs of dissipating, remaining thick. The young man and woman were faintly discernible in the mist, and it was impossible to see what they were doing. Ning Shiwei and Zhu Yi solemnly glanced at each other, seeing the wariness in each other's hearts. They knew that this mysterious master of the cinnabar pill was no ordinary person. It was precisely because they had mentally prepared themselves that they had personally come to this remote mountain range. Yet they had not expected this person to possess such an unfathomable level of cultivation, such strange and incomprehensible techniques, and even more frightening was his callous and unyielding will. They couldn't help but wonder, could it be that the Tang clan had retreated at the last moment because they knew more inside information and had intentionally used them as the vanguard? Just like how they had secretly arranged for the squad in the pavilion. But at this point, they could no longer make any other arrangements. You're seeking death. Tianhai Zhani's entire body trembled in rage as he harshly yelled, "Fire!" Ning Shiwei said nothing, his expression indifferent as he gazed into the mist, the frost on his armor suddenly growing heavier. The sounds of ballistae being drawn taut echoed through the forest by the lake. 100 of the toughest divine ballistae of the Mount Song army were aimed at that figure in the depths of the mist. Zhu also said nothing. His eyes slightly narrowed, the fur on his fur coat standing up at some point and stabbing into the night sky. He looked like a fierce tiger preparing to leap into a ravine and fight. He and Ning Shiwei were well aware that the 100 divine crossbows of the Mount Song army headquarters were not necessarily enough to deal with the young man and woman in the fog. On the contrary, it was highly likely to arouse their true viciousness. If they wanted to kill their way out of the encirclement, they would assuredly attack with all their strength. Thus, whether they could obtain complete victory tonight would depend on the next exchange. He had to end this battle in an instant, so he naturally couldn't hold back. He had to use his full strength. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei had calm expressions, but in truth, they were already silently circulating their true essence, raising their qi to its peak state as they prepared to subdue or kill their opponent in a single strike. One was the head of the Zhu clan, the other a divine general of the Great Zhou, both indisputably upper-level star condensation experts. With the two of them acting in such a resolute manner, coupled with the cooperation of over 100 divine crossbows, let alone the fact that the man and woman in the fog were still very young, even experts of the proclamation of liberation at the level of Xiao Zhang or Liang Wang's son would probably have to temporarily avoid their attacks. Just when battle was about to break out, a cool breeze suddenly blew. The extreme north of this mountain range was already very close to the land of demons, and it was also midwinter, so the night winds in the mountains were naturally extremely cold, so cold that they could be described as bone-piercing. However, this garden, lake, and pavilion had hot springs that converged, so even the most frigid of strong winds that blew across the surface of a lake were no longer cold, but rather a refreshing breeze. This breeze ruffled the lotus leaves on the lake, ruffled the clothes on the corpses, and the thick fog that seemed like it would never disperse gradually began to fade. Starlight descended from the night sky, boundlessly illuminated by the white snow covering the mountains and plains, illuminating the surface of the lake with great clarity. This place was very much like a garden in the south. The lake and mountain contrasted with each other, the flowers and trees shading each other, lotuses growing in the water, a pavilion in the lotus, and a wooden bridge to the north and south of the pavilion. At this moment, the bridge was broken. The starlight fell on the broken bridge, first falling on a hand. This hand was very small, as white as jade, but at this moment it was covered in blood. The black-clothed girl looked at her hand, her brow tightly furrowed, her mouth slightly open, the tip of her tongue faintly visible. She seemed to be hesitating whether or not she should lick it. At her side, a young man had his head lowered, using a handkerchief to wipe the water off his body. His body had probably been soaked by the splashing of water when the bridge was broken by the mountain rocks. He then handed the handkerchief to the black-clothed girl, probably wanting her to wipe the blood off her hand. All was quiet. Whether it was the people trapped in the pavilion or the people on the lakeside, they all watched this scene with complicated emotions and remained silent. Those people in the pavilion now probably understood the role they were playing in this matter, so they remained silent. The soldiers and experts by the lake were silent because they were shocked that the other party really was a young man and woman. Although their faces were handsome, there was nothing special about them. Inexplicably, Ning Shiwei and Zhu Yi also remained silent until they clearly saw the young man's face. In a very short period of time, their expressions changed countless times as if they had seen something inconceivable, and then they squeezed out a few sound from their mouths. It was a very complex and strange sound, like a sigh, but also more helpless and somewhat pained, more like a groan. Note, then, their bodies suddenly sank down. Not much, only half a foot. Their feet sank into the shore of the lake. Two terrifying and powerful chis exploded outwards. Countless rocks and mud were jolted into the air like arrows. Several soldiers and an expert of the emotion-severing sect that were slightly closer to them were shaken into a bloody pulp. Even the people farther away were injured, their screams echoing through the air. The ballista bolts that were about to be fired vanished in this chaos. Ning Shiwei's armor was covered in dust, and his complexion was like iron, extremely unsightly. Zhu Yi coughed incessantly, appearing to be in some pain. Eva's back was bent over. Just what was going on? Tianhai Zhani's emotions were similarly in chaos. His cultivation level was not high enough, but he was still a descendant of a noble clan and had received a good education since childhood. He had seen many experts, so he understood what was going on. Just a moment ago, Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei had raised their chis to their peak, their every movement possessing the power to cleave apart mountains. But just like the great river flowing east, if one wanted to stop a time like this, one had to pay a corresponding price. In normal times, they were completely capable of slowly dispersing their chis, but for some reason, they had to do it immediately, resulting in a few problems. Although they had forced the vast majority of their chis into the earth, there were still some shock waves rippling out. Just how terrifying were the chis of two upper-level star condensation experts, even if it was just the shock waves? As a result, the battlefield was in chaos, and they themselves had suffered significant injuries. Tianhai Zhani understood what was going on, but he was even more confused about what was going on. Why had Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei suddenly dispersed their chis? And why had they been so resolute? It had to be known that they were not ordinary cultivators, but the masters of noble clans, important generals, truly ambitious and ruthless individuals. When their will to fight exploded, even if the one standing across from them was their own son, they would still strike. Yet when they saw the young man's face, they knew that they could not strike. Even if they had to jolt their trusted subordinates to death, even if they had to risk their own injuries, they had to immediately let their opponent know that they would not strike. Immediately. To make a clan master and a divine general of the great Zhou feel such fear. Just who was that person standing on the broken bridge? In the next moment, Tianhai Zhani finally realized who that young man was. His face instantly paled, not from anger, but from the boundless bewilderment and fear in his heart. Note, when Ning Shiwei and Zhu Yi saw Chen Changsheng's small face, they could not help but let out that sound. Please refer to the sound that Yang Juhua could not help but make when Zhou Meiyan 201-51213 sang her tears in the 5th season of Copstar. I've always been a loyal viewer of this Korean drama, and this year I strongly recommended it. At the time, Yang Juhwa's moans were especially good. Really, everyone just needs to search for it. Youku and Billy have it. Chapter 760. If Tianhai Zhani still could not guess that person's identity, what right did he have to contend with Tianhai Xingxue for the position of clan head? In the Myriad Willows Garden, he had even mentioned this possibility, even saying that if it really was that person, he would very much like to meet him. Who could have expected that he would really meet that person tonight? What would he do next? Only then did he realize that any preconceived notions were meaningless, because before the real situation appeared, people tended to have more courage than their real selves. He couldn't do anything now. He didn't even have the courage to look her in the eye. Very few people now compare that person to other experts of the younger generation, not because that person's strength had already far surpassed his peers, but because that person had long since surpassed the category of so-called young geniuses. He was no longer a mortal, but a true saint. As he gazed at that figure on the broken bridge, Tianhai Zhani's body went extremely stiff, wishing that he had not appeared tonight. Zhu Yi was still coughing. The Zhu clan head's injuries seemed to be more severe than anyone had imagined. He coughed painfully, his head lowered, his waist bent, unable to straighten his body. It was like his lungs were about to burst from the coughing. With some difficulty, he raised his right hand and waved. The experts of the emotion-severing sect understood and stepped forward to support him. Then, they retreated into the darkness. Upon clearly seeing the face of that person on the bridge, Ning Shiwei's complexion turned nasty. As he watched Zhu Yi retreat, his complexion turned even gloomier, because he had understood. Zhu Yi had been coughing painfully precisely so that he would not raise his head. As long as he did not raise his head, he would not see that person on the bridge, or perhaps he would not let that person on the bridge see him. In this way, he could pretend that he had not seen anything before, that he had not seen anything now, that he had not recognized that person's identity. Ning Shiwei's reaction was not as fast as Zhu Yi's, so he could not pretend. So what should he do? Tianhai Zhani also came to his senses. As he watched Zhu Yi and the others retreat into the darkness with unimaginable speed, he inwardly cursed the old fox. The experts of the emotion-severing sect supported Zhu Yi as they retreated, but there were still many people around the lake. There were no more sounds of crossbows being knocked, blades being unsheathed, metal grinding, somber and heavy breathing. All was silent. The soldiers of the crossbow camp and the experts of the Tianhai clan had already vaguely guessed at what was going on and were extremely nervous and uneasy. Even their breathing seemed to stop. What was supposed to be a short few breaths of time felt like an eternity to them. The armored figure finally bowed towards the center of the lake. Looking at this scene, everyone felt like they had just survived a disaster. If he insisted on not kneeling, no matter what happened tonight, how many of the hundreds of people present would be able to survive? Ning Shiwei of the Mount Song army pays respects to His Holiness the Pope. Ning Shiwei knelt on one knee in the snow by the shore. Tianhai Zhani was kneeling nearby, his head lowered, making it impossible to see the expression on his face. The sound of metal rubbing against each other once again broke the silence of the snow lake. It was not the sound of swords being unsheathed, but the sound of armor changing shape. Several hundred people knelt in the snowy forest by the lake, facing the figure on the bridge and saying in unison, paying respects to His Holiness the Pope. Their voices were very uniform, but some were trembling slightly. It was unknown whether they were nervous, excited, or afraid. The young man was obviously not used to it. After a moment of silence, he said, "Get up." "Thank you, Your Holiness." The clattering of armor once more rose up. The young man said, "Disperse." Countless gazes fell on Ning Shiwei and Tianhai Zhani. Tianhai Zhani's face was pale, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. He said nothing, appearing rather sinister and stern, but he finally had the stubbornness of a young man. Ning Shiwei expressionlessly said, "We solemnly obey His Holiness's decree." The clattering of armor and the hurried sound of footsteps rang out. The snow and mud were trampled apart, just like the mood of many people. Disperse. With these simple words, everyone dispersed. The torches were nowhere to be seen. The starlight once more flourished, and the darkness thickened. In the blink of an eye, the lake returned to its undisturbed state. There was only the young man and woman on the broken bridge, and those people in the pavilion who were unable to leave. The young man was naturally Chun Changsheng, who had vanished for 2 years. The black-clothed girl was the little black dragon. She now had a name, Cinnabar. The lake was quiet and beautiful. Qin Changsheng gazed at the lotus leaves in the lake, silently thinking. It was very normal for someone to use the Cinnabar pill to find clues to his whereabouts. It was also normal for those people to discover that he was the master of the Cinnabar pill, so they hastily retreated without fighting. Probably only that madman, Xiao Zhang, would dare to attack the current pope in front of so many people. But when these two things happened together, it was clearly abnormal. It was obvious that both the people in the pavilion and the people who had just left were characters being used. It seemed like tonight's matter was not over yet. The lake was very quiet, as if nothing had happened at all. No rocks had fallen from the sky. No experts had surrounded the lake. No murder had occurred in the fog. No blood had dyed the lake red, and no rain of crossbows had nearly been unleashed. But the wooden bridge had still been broken, the lake had still been red, and those people had still come, so it was not advisable to stay here for long. He glanced at Cinnabar. Cinnabar rolled her eyes at him. In the end, she was still a black frost dragon. Even a little girl's action of rolling her eyes had a different effect. Her bewitching vertical pupils were especially white, clearly expressing her emotions. But she still complied with his wishes and removed the seal on the pavilion. The general led his people out of the pavilion and prostrated, not daring to speak. And Hua's mind was in extreme agitation, but her movements were still meticulous and pious. But when she thought about her rudeness to the Pope, she couldn't help but feel nervous. As for the one-armed Sir Yang, his face was pale and terrified. He thought to himself, I'm probably doomed. Leave this place as quickly as possible. Something will happen in a little while, and when the time comes, I might not be able to protect all of you. Chen Changsheng did not turn around. He calmly gazed at a certain place in the mountains. There was an endless darkness there, and it seemed to hide endless dangers as well. In a certain place in the mountains, the Tang's 17th master was also gazing at the same darkness. The former bishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons and his personal subordinates from Wenshui were currently looking at him with eyes brimming with respect. Everyone now naturally knew that the Tang's 17th master had long since known of the identity of the Cinnabar Pill's master. Now that they thought about it, the suppression he had received from Zhu Yi, Tianhai Zhani, and the others was naturally just a facade. He truly was worthy of being the master of the Tang clan. His methods were truly steady and ruthless. If this was a scheme to borrow a knife, then tonight he had unquestionably borrowed the world's fastest knife. Even if Zhu Yi and the others had reacted so quickly, even if Chen Changxing's personality was still as gentle as it was in the past, if the Li Palace were to learn of this matter, how could the orthodoxy let it go? But why was it that the Tang's 17th master's face showed no pride, only such solemnity? This chapter has been too difficult. The main reason is that there are 3 clues in the grand plot that is about to unfold. I have never been the best at writing about changing scenes, so I had a headache over how to get to the point. In the end, I decided to get straight to the point and kill to my heart's content. Chapter 761. Somewhere in the snowy mountains, a small hole was torn open in the deep night by a torch. Tianhai Zhani stared at Zhu Yi, his complexion abnormally nasty. He said in extreme anger and humiliation, "You're leaving just like that?" Zhu Yi expressionlessly looked at him and said, "That day in the myriad willows garden, who was it that said this person was in the south?" Tianhai Zhani said nothing. On that day, he had relayed the words of the Prince of Xiang. This highly esteemed prince represented the thoughts of the great Zhou dynasty. The imperial court had always believed that Chen Changsheng was hiding in the Tiannan, either at Holy Maiden Peak or Scholartree Manor. No one had expected him to appear in these mountains, and to be the master of the Cinnabar Pill at that. Ning Shiwei looked at Zhu Yi and silently asked, "There are too many people." Zhu Yi's answer was very simple and contained many unspoken meanings. This place was already very far from the garden, but it was still not far enough. At the very least, it was not 1,000 miles away, so he was very careful with his words. Ning Shiwei and Tianhai Zhani both understood. There were too many people, so I left. If there were fewer people, would there have been a different ending tonight? Tianhai Zhani clenched his teeth and hatefully said, "Those merchants of the Tang clan are truly sinister." In his view, since the Cinnabar Pill had come from Chen Changxing's hands, and the Wenshui Tangs were in charge of distributing the Cinnabar Pills, the Tang clan naturally knew of this secret, or at the very least had some evidence. Thus, the Tang's 17th master's forbearance and avoidance was naturally to bait them into a direct conflict with Chen Changxing. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei also thought the same. If it weren't for their quick reflexes, thick-skinned, and resolute decision to retreat, the situation at the lakeside might have gotten out of hand. This had nothing to do with a comparison of strength. Chen Changxing's talent in cultivation was naturally extremely high, and that black-clothed girl was probably that legendary figure. Even so, she was not necessarily a match for all of them working together. Yet under the gazes of so many people, Just who could bear the crime of disrespecting the Pope? But was he really going to leave just like that? Zhu Yi suddenly said, "Tonight made me think of that storm in Xuanyang City many years ago." This was naturally referring to the old matter of the entire world trying to kill Su Li. The current situation was naturally different from back then, and the positions of Chun Changsheng and Su Li in this world were also different, but the two matters had their similarities. Whether it was Su Li or Chun Changsheng, as long as they revealed themselves in the world, there would naturally be many people who want to kill them. Even if he couldn't do it openly, he could do it secretly. He couldn't do it in front of many people, but he could do it secretly. Everyone understood Zhu Ye's meaning. He had no choice but to leave. He had to show his attitude. But in reality, it was also very difficult for Chun Changsheng to leave this snowy mountain tonight. What they needed to do now was to spread Chun Changsheng's location as soon as possible, and at the same time, prepare for an ambush in this dark and cold snowy mountain range. At this moment, the sound of a zither suddenly came from the mountain path hidden in the darkness. The sound of the zither was very flat, very light, like water condensed into snow, snow frozen into ice, covering the road, cold and dangerous. The Tang family did not know that the master of the cinnabar pill was Chun Changsheng. At least before tonight, they, like the imperial court, believed that Chun Changsheng was definitely hiding somewhere in the south. Only when they obtained a complete cinnabar pill and analyzed it, suspecting that the red crystal threads within were blood coral, did the Tang 17th master think of this possibility for the first time. It was just a guess, a possibility that could not be completely eliminated, and it was even more impossible to prove, so he did not take it too seriously, at least not on the surface. But in reality, this conjecture had given birth to an idea. Once this idea appeared, it was impossible to eliminate, impossible to suppress. Like a wildfire, it burned more and more fiercely, burning his heart with an unbearable itch. Would the Tang clan end up in the hands of the chief branch or the second branch? This depended on the difference in strength between the two sides and the attitude of the old master, but it was also closely related to the assistance the two branches received from the outside world. In the last 2 years, the second branch had won the deep trust of the old master and constantly grown in power. Why? It was because the Tang's second master had the support of the venerable Taoist master, who was the backer of the chief branch. Many years ago, the first master had sent his only son, Tang Tang, to the Heavenly Tao Academy to be raised by Zhuang Jihuan. From this, it was clear that the first master had a good relationship with the orthodoxy. This was even more true now. Everyone knew of the relationship between Tang Tang and Chun Changsheng. No matter how great the pressure from the imperial court was, no one would be stupid enough to abandon their friendship with the Pope. If the second branch wanted to surpass the chief branch and take over the entire Tang clan, it first had to resolve this matter. As the Tang's second master's most trusted arm, the Tang's 17th master had thought of this problem countless times, so when he realized this possibility, he very naturally had an idea. If that person really was Chun Changsheng, then could he think of a way to kill him? No one dared to attack the Pope in broad daylight. Tian Haizhani did not dare. Ning Shiwei did not dare. Zhu Yi did not dare, and not even the Tang's second master dared. The Tang's 17th master naturally did not dare. But on that night, when he saw his own eyes gradually sinking from ambition and fear in the copper mirror, he finally made up his mind. If it wasn't Chun Changsheng, then he would fight for it. If it really was Chun Changsheng, then he would watch Chun Changsheng die. He did not tell this idea to anyone, not even writing a letter to his second brother. This way, he could pretend that he knew nothing. He truly had not done anything. He had only failed to conceal the news that he had found the cinnabar pill's master too perfectly, allowing the news to spread. Thus, many people came tonight. Although Zhu Yi and the others had left, he knew that Chun Changsheng would find it very difficult to leave these mountains. Those people would hide in the darkness, waiting for a chance to strike. Most importantly, there would be more people coming tonight. This statement was not particularly accurate because the people coming were not humans. No one dared to attack Chun Changsheng in broad daylight, But those were not humans, but demons. Before the mist of the lake dispersed, no one knew that the current pope, Chun Changsheng, lived in such a remote place deep in the mountains. But the master of the cinnabar pill lived here. The Tang's 17th master firmly believed that as long as the demons knew of this news, they would assuredly dispatch true experts. The demons had not come here to steal the cinnabar pill or the pill formula, but to kill. The Tang's 17th master gazed into the darkness to the north. He seemed to see something, but in reality, he saw nothing at all. The sky there was perpetually covered in snow and clouds that obscured the starlight. Even those perilous snowy peaks were difficult to see. The northernmost peaks of Mount Han were the natural barrier between the human world and the land of demons. This place was frigid and bone-chilling winds. Even among the innately hardy demons, only a few experts could cross it. At this moment, on the other side of the mountain range, several black, mountainous figures seemed to be moving slowly, but were actually cutting through the darkness with incredible speed as they headed south. I love that song to death. In every novel, there are always 2 or 3 scenes like this. Chapter 762. Several mountainous black figures arrived at the highest point of the snowy mountain. Beyond this point was the human world, even though this place should have been desolate and uninhabited on the maps and military reports. The leader of the devil race only had one hand, and he raised it at this time, signaling for them to stop. The cold winds blew against his iron clothes and his black hair, revealing 2 demon horns that were impossible to tell if they were real or fake. His eyes were dark green and callous to the extreme. His tall body exuded an incredibly powerful chi that would make anyone who saw him feel boundless fear. The second-ranked demon general, Heidi, whether in Shuilao City or the snowy plains, whether it was the demons or the humans, they were all used to calling him Lord Heidi out of respect or fear. As an important figure of the demon army, second only to the demon commander, he had killed countless human soldiers and cultivators, and his vicious reputation had spread far and wide. Several years ago, in the snowy plains, when the demons ambushed Su Li, he had been one of the main forces participating in the battle. At the time, Su Li had chopped off one of his arms, and he had also left a deep wound on Su Li's shoulder. To be able to wound Su Li, one could imagine just how terrifying the strength of this powerful demon was. Heidi looked down at the estate in the snowy mountains, a rare chill appearing on his cold and green face. There were very few things in the world that could shock him. This estate was still very far from the highest point of the mountain, perhaps Tinsum Zhang away. In the eyes of these demon experts, this estate was like a bonsai. The starlight fell on the bonsai. On the bridge by the lake was a young man, so small that he looked like a grain of sand. If not for Heidi, it would have been impossible to clearly make out the young man's appearance. He could clearly see him, so he was very shocked. At this moment, the young man raised his head and looked at the summit. Separated by a mountain of 10,000 zhang, they silently stared at each other for a very long time. "I did not expect that it would be your majesty," Heidi expressionlessly said. He naturally spoke in the language of the demons, his voice deep and suffused with a strange charm. "Leave this place as quickly as possible. Something will happen in a little while, and when the time comes, I might not be able to protect you." After saying this, Qin Changsheng sensed a ripple from the divine staff hidden extremely deep within him. This made him realize that the devil race had arrived, and the one who had come should be a terrifying expert that he couldn't deal with. He looked up to the highest point of the snow-capped peak, but he couldn't see clearly what was happening there. No matter how good his eyesight was, he could not see through the seemingly endless night. But he knew who was there, and Hua, the general, and the others were all shocked because he was not saying that he could not protect them, but that he could not protect them. Not even the Pope could protect them. So, just who was the enemy that was about to arrive? A gust of wind suddenly rose on the lake that was originally as beautiful as spring. The cold wind in the snowy mountains broke through the breath of the 4 seasons and swept back and forth on the surface of the lake, producing bursts of ear-piercing sounds. Amidst the whistling wind, there were also some other sounds. Other than in Hua, everyone else realized that this was the language of the demons, and the general himself even understood the words His Majesty. Everyone's complexion changed. Only now did they realize that the enemy was actually a demon, and it must be a powerhouse from the demon race. No one fled. They all pulled out the sabers and swords at their waists and rushed behind Chen Changsheng. The general had Hua take care of the young array master on the stretcher in the back while he walked into the pavilion and knocked Sir Yang unconscious. The battle with the demon experts was about to begin. At a time like this, he would not permit any element of insecurity to exist in his camp. Zhu Sha glanced at the general with some admiration. Chen Changsheng gazed at the distant peak and sighed. I also didn't think that I would see you again tonight. A little more than a year ago, the last time he had appeared before the people of the world was on the battlefield between the humans and demons. At the time, he had taken Zhu Sha with him and concealed his identity in that army headquarters. As he worked as a medical officer to save people, he also silently killed demons. On that day, when the situation of the human army was truly too dangerous, he was forced to reveal his identity. His 1,000 swords shot out in unison, forcefully reversing the course of the battle. But he also drew in that terrifying demon expert. Heidi descended from the sky and used a single move to heavily injure him. Zhu Sha had taken the risk of having her soul wander and escape Heidi's senses, taking him underground and leaving the battlefield. But who could have expected that in that lush mountain range, they would be ambushed by several human experts? Afterwards, they naturally understood that these human experts were from the imperial court. More accurately, they were from the pavilion of heavenly secrets used by the imperial court. The situation at the time had truly been extremely dangerous. If Lu Qing had not silently appeared like a ghost, perhaps he would already be dead. This was a rather bitter memory that made Chen Changsheng feel a little cold. Thus, he had chosen to live in seclusion in this desolate and uninhabited mountain range. And the source of all this was Heidi. Tonight, he had once more encountered him. Would those encounters from back then be repeated? On the frigid peak, Heidi looked down at the distant pearl-like lake, his face expressionless and callous to the extreme. I have come on the orders of the military advisor to take your life. Black Robe wanted to kill the master of the Cinnabar Pill. If he knew that the master of the Cinnabar Pill was Chen Changsheng, he would naturally want to kill him even more. In this desolate and uninhabited mountain range, a young pope without the protection of a true expert. If he missed out on such an excellent chance, Shuilao City would be abandoned by the moon god. For some reason, Heidi was not worried that Chen Changsheng would escape. He did not rush down the mountain range, but stood on the peak to speak with him. What happened next gave him the answer. He did not need to rush down the mountain range. He was confident that Chen Changsheng would not be able to leave in time. Heidi jumped down from the peak. A streak of fire lit up in the night sky and then was quickly extinguished. The winds howled, the starlight dimmed, and even the darkness seemed to be torn out of shape. Not long ago, Ning Shiwei had shaken off a rock and broken the wooden bridge over the lake. Heidi, on the other hand, treated himself as a rock, no, a mountain. Compared to his momentum, Ning Shiwei's rock was laughably weak. With a shrill shriek, a mountainous shadow covered the surface of the lake. An unimaginably terrifying impact landed on the lake. Boom! With a dull and terrifying thunderous crash, the water in the lake instantly evaporated. Mist filled the air, shrouding half the mountain range. The courtyard had been destroyed, reduced to rubble. The wooden bridge was like a dead snake that had cracked inch by inch as it lay on the muddy bottom of the lake. The soldiers from the Mount Song Army headquarters were either dead, injured, or unconscious. A green leaf unfurled in front of Hua, protecting her and the array master on the stretcher. The deputy general was still alive. He lay in the rubble of the broken pavilion, constantly vomiting blood. As he gazed at the turbulent Qi, still wreaking havoc in the darkness, he revealed an expression of despair. At this moment, the clear cry of a sword finally rang out. Countless sword intents came from every direction, carrying with them the will of a storm as they slashed at that mountainous black figure. I recommend to everyone a novel, Mo Wu's Stealing Fragrance. It's a new book from Dian, and the writing style is superb. It's worth following. Okay, this is the standard advertising phrase. In truth, Mo Wu is truly an old author. Many years ago, everyone was mingling in the Jianghu. Later on, based on what I know, he switched to a physical body. Now that he has returned to the world of web literature, I ask for everyone's support. Chapter 763. Countless sword glows suddenly appeared in the fog. Chen Changsheng gazed at the fog, his left knee slightly bent, his right hand gripping the hilt of the sword at his waist. It seemed like he was about to attack at any moment. In reality, countless swords had already flowed out of his perlicue, out of his clothes, and slashed in every direction. Incomparably sharp sword intents pervaded the world. The already dilapidated courtyard was instantly sliced into countless pieces, whether it was the round stones at the bottom of the lake or the snow-covered forest. But the fog around him remained unbroken. At some point, the color of this fog had become abnormally deep, pitch black like the night. It was incomparably thick, incomparably real, like the most viscous of mud. No matter how sharp and powerful a sword intent, upon falling into this black fog, was like a withered leaf falling into muddy water. It spun, struggled, and then vanished. This black fog was no longer a pure mist of water. It was now tainted with the purest demon intent. With a swish, Chen Changsheng pulled out his dagger. The pure and bright sword ignored the dreadful and filthy demonic intent and finally cut a hole in the demonic mist. The black fog madly surged, especially the hole cut by the stainless sword. It seemed like black mud was gushing out of it. A hand reached out of the sputtering black fog, gripping a stone-like weapon. If one looked carefully, they would see that it was actually half a broken monolith. Compared to this weapon shaped like a broken monolith, the hand itself was even more terrifying. Not even the tearing space and Chen Changsheng's supremely powerful sword intent could make that hand tremble in the slightest. The black fog surged even more violently, and that mountainous demon figure finally appeared in Chen Changsheng's line of sight. The howling cold winds ruffled the hair of this demon personage, but they could not shake those two demon horns, nor could they shake him. The broken monolith fell from the sky. Chen Changsheng seemed to see a massive black mountain collapse in front of him, crushing down on him. An indescribably berserk chi rumbled without the slightest deviation toward a spot an inch to the right between his eyebrows. This boundlessly tyrannical strength was directed at the smallest place, a symbol of D's unstoppable strength. More than a year ago on the battlefield of the snowy plains, Chen Changsheng had already experienced this almost suffocating experience. Even if he had 1,000 sword intents and 10,000 techniques, he would not be able to make up for the insurmountable gap between their strengths. There was nothing new, as if it was the same as last year. His eyes were still bright and clear without any fear. With a flick of his wrist, the dagger flew towards his eyebrows. He was still prepared to use the third sword that Su Li had taught him. Stupid sword. He knew that this attack could block D, but he would also be heavily injured. On the battlefield, this outcome had already been proven, but he still chose to do so. From the looks of it, this choice was indeed a little stupid, just like the name of the sword. But other than this attack, he had no other way to block D's full-strength strike. Yes, he could not dodge, could not retreat. He had to block D, just like on the battlefield, because at that time, there were hundreds of ordinary human soldiers behind him. Now, there were ordinary people who were injured and unable to leave. But tonight, he was not fighting alone. Ever since he was seriously injured on the battlefield last year, the little girl had never let him out of her sight. Suddenly, an even darker shadow appeared in the thick black fog. It was the trace left behind by her moving forward at high speed in the space. When Chen Changsheng raised the dagger to his eyes, the black-clothed girl appeared in front of him. She raised her hands to meet the broken monolith breaking out of the fog. Compared to D's mountainous body, she was so petite. Compared to the broken monolith of black stone, her pure white hands were so pitiful, so fragile that they seemed like they could shatter into countless pieces at any moment. but she still raised her hands to meet the monolith. Her posture was rather strange, not like she was fighting, but like she was offering flowers. In the next moment, a flower pot really did appear in her hands. But there were no flowers in this pot, only a green leaf. Moreover, there were only 2 leaves left, making it seem rather miserable. The broken monolith and the green leaf met in the air. There was no sound. Compared to the howling of the surrounding fog as it was compressed, the silence in front of the broken bridge was rather strange. This was because these 2 energies were so terrifyingly powerful that they tore apart the surrounding objects and shook them at a frequency that exceeded what normal creatures could hear. The last bits of water in the mud were forced out by these 2 powerful energies and then evaporated. Soon after, they were frozen by the cold exuding from the black-clothed girl's face. The fog gradually thinned. Whether it was moisture or demonic intent, they were all condensed into water. Before they could turn into rain, they were frozen into pearls of ice. Countless crystalline pearls of ice reflected the starlight descending from the night sky. Like countless night pearls, they illuminated this place with incomparable beauty. So beautiful that it seemed otherworldly. Just like those countless nights at the bottom of New North Bridge. Standing in front of these tiny pearls of ice, the black-clothed girl's figure was still petite. But at this moment, she no longer gave off any feeling of delicacy. Instead, she was incomparably powerful. An incomprehensible laugh rose from Heidi's lips. The fog suddenly became thicker again. The terrifying devil energy, like a monstrous flood, slammed towards her. The abnormally parched bottom of the lake was now covered in countless deep scars. Her black clothes madly danced, several tears appearing on them. Her black hair madly danced, several strands of it falling off. The chains around her ankles also madly danced, like a snake enduring endless pain in a blaze. It was obvious that she, who had not been able to completely break the seal, was still no match for this powerful demon, even with the treasures of the Lee Palace. But there was still no sign of fear on her face that was as cold as ice, much less any thought of running away. She raised her head like a headstrong girl, and also like a proud dragon. All of this happened in an extremely brief moment. Chun Changsheng had not sheathed his sword, but he also had no time to help her. As rocks tumbled down and the air cracked like thunder, several black silhouettes as tall as pavilions arrived outside the valley. These were all demon experts that had followed Heidi. Chun Changsheng suddenly vanished. Several dozen faint footprints suddenly appeared on the hard, dry, and cracked bottom of the lake. If someone were to look up at the countless stars in the night sky, they might be able to see that the positions of these footprints had some sort of secret connection to the constellations in the sky. This was the Yesher step that he had comprehended from the Taoist canon. After these years of research, especially after gradually digesting the heavenly tome monolith inscriptions, it was no longer the same as it was in the past. In the blink of an eye, he left the broken bridge and headed out of the snowy valley. He brought with him endless wind and rain that enveloped all the demon race experts. Wind and rain, they were all swords. Swords were everywhere. Gulu and Mu. Heidi suddenly yelled, his voice tinged with unconcealable shock. I only returned from the hospital around 10. I was so tired. I really thought that I wouldn't be able to write anymore today. I didn't think that I would be so awesome. In addition, in the WeChat vote, the name Zhu won, but I really want to use Gigi. When I wrote it, I always felt that little black dragon Zhu didn't go, so, well, let me think again. Chapter 764. Gulu and Mu meant careful in the language of the demons. Heidi naturally knew that Chun Changsheng knew the Yesher step. Last year, he had even personally experienced Chun Changsheng's sword style on the battlefield, so he knew that this young pope truly did possess a cultivation talent and cultivation that far surpassed his peers. However, he did not believe that Chun Changsheng could defeat the capable subordinates he had brought with him. But when Chun Changsheng disappeared and a storm of swords appeared in the snowy valley, he felt a strong sense of alarm. Only now did he realize that Chun Changsheng had intentionally concealed his true level when he had executed those sword moves. In a short span of a year or so, Chun Changxing's cultivation level did not change, but his way of the sword actually improved again, reaching an unimaginable level. Thinking about it, the black-clothed girl taking on his broken monolith must have been part of their plan. This arrangement reflected their incomparably strong confidence or determination. They were confident that the green leaf in the black-clothed girl's hands could at least delay a terrifying figure like Heidi for a while. They believed that within this period of time, Chun Changshang would be able to kill all the remaining enemies that would arrive. There were swords everywhere in the snowy valley, but the real bodies of the swords could not be seen. They could only feel the sword will. The wind and rain were all swords, and the swords were hidden in the wind and rain. Occasionally, they would show their true faces, but they would definitely be close to the bodies of those devil race experts. The sound of metal rubbing and cutting rang out without any rhythm. Around the tall figures of the devil race powerhouses, incomparably sharp sword marks appeared without any pattern. These sword marks were the marks left behind by the swords and the bodies of the demon race experts. They were like lightning, exceptionally dazzling and soul-stirring. The bodies of demons were innately tough. Even the most ordinary demon had a body as tough as that of a human who had undergone a perfect purification. The people who had come with Heidi to kill tonight were some of the top experts of the demon army, so the toughness of their bodies was unimaginable. Coupled with the faint black demon chi, not even the famed swords hidden in the storm could instantly break through it. However, the demon elites couldn't retaliate because they couldn't confirm Chun Changsheng's position. The swords were hidden in the wind and rain, while Chun Changsheng was behind the wind and rain. To find him, one must first disperse these swords. This situation did not last long. Because the wind and rain suddenly became violent, the number of flying swords in the valley instantly multiplied. Water dripping through stone was a scene that spanned an extremely long period of time. What Chun Changxing needed to do was condense countless years into an extremely short period of time. With a light cautious sound, the moss-covered rock with a small hole finally cracked open. Then, somewhat powerlessly, it separated to the two sides, breaking apart. With a light cracking sound, a crack also appeared on the body of a demon expert. Then, countless more cracks appeared. The sword glows in the storm suddenly brightened, illuminating the gloomy, snow-white faces. Several hundred streams of green blood spurted out from the bodies of the demon experts. It looked like painters of Shualao City were wildly sprinkling paint on a black curtain, giving off an endlessly bewitching feeling. Several low howls filled with pain rang out in the valley. The tall figures of the two demon race experts collapsed like mountains. If this situation continued, Chun Changxing only needed a little more time to heavily injure all the demon experts in the valley, and then he could turn around and join forces with the little black dragon to attack Heidi from the front and back. Even if they were still no match for Heidi, they should still be able to find a way to escape. As an important figure of the demon army, second only to the demon commander, Heidi had dominated the snowy plains of the demon realm for many years, so how could he not see through their intentions? A howl brimming with killing intent burst from Heidi's lips. At the same time, a milky white ray of light shot out from his lips and fused into the surging demon intent. This milky white ray of light was abnormally pure, devoid of any impurities. It even exuded a divine aura. In Xuanyang City, Chun Changsheng had seen this sort of ray of light. Although he didn't have time to turn around, he already knew what it was. This was moonlight, the bright moon from the northernmost part of the continent. It possessed a radiance not inferior to the stars, and in terms of berserk energy, it even surpassed them. Crack, 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 crack. Countless crisp cracking sounds rang out simultaneously in the courtyard that had long since turned into ruins. It was like tens of thousands of candles exploding at the same time, or like firecrackers welcoming the new year. Countless crystalline shards of ice shattered and slowly drifted down from the night sky, sprinkling over the little black dragon's body and the broken bridge. The broken monolith in Heidi's hand broke through the icy mist and continued to press down on the little black dragon. The edge of a green leaf was slightly curled up, and one could faintly make out a crack. The crack was as thin as a hair, but it was a ghastly sight. A hint of anger and fury appeared in the little black dragon's eyes. Her clothes were already riddled with countless holes, and even the corners of her eyes had split open. Dragon blood, imbued with an indescribable chi, flowed out of the corners of her eyes and then froze into two streams of blood. If Sheng did not hurry back, perhaps in the next moment, she would become yet another dragon that would die beneath this broken monolith. The torrential rain in the snowy valley suddenly stopped, but the wind did not. Sheng's body transformed into a stream of light as he rushed back. Those demon experts had heard Lord Heidi's howl and knew what Sheng was about to do. So how could they let him do as he wished? The gale suddenly shattered into countless gusts of wind. Amidst the muffled groans, there were several low humming sounds. The right hands of several demon experts had transformed into flowers of blood in the darkness. They had unhesitatingly used the demon race's secret blood technique. Sheng similarly did not hesitate. He did not stop or attempt to dodge. Borrowing the wind and the energy of the fists to retreat, he moved even faster. Several muffled collisions resounded through the darkness and then slowly dissipated, leaving no echo. Sheng had already returned to the broken bridge and was standing in front of the little black dragon. Several holes had been ripped open on the front of his robe, revealing the skin underneath. Several deep fist marks had been left on it. The broken monolith was falling. A bright light illuminated the broken bridge and the ruined lake, like a bolt of lightning, but also so heavy, like a chain across a great river, but also so sturdy, more like the impregnable dikes of a great river. This was the stupid sword that only fools like Sheng and Wang Po could learn. Know the foolishness, defend the foolishness. Thus, this sword was the #1 defensive sword in the world. Even someone as terrifying as Heidi, even his full-strength attack, even this legendary monolith that no one knew about, could not break this sword. Sheng's sword blocked the broken monolith. But his sword could not block this power. This majestic power that seemed to originate from ancient times struck his body. His right hand, which was holding the sword, heavily struck his own chest, causing a terrifying bone-cracking sound to ring out. He flew backward, colliding against the little black dragon. A mouthful of blood spurted from her lips. They flew through the air like stones, flying through the ice and darkness. They crashed through the pavilion in the middle of the bridge and crashed across the lake. Chapter 765. The deputy general from the Mount Song Army headquarters propped up his heavily injured body and staggered to stand in front of Changsheng and Jiji. After blocking the shock waves of qi, he crashed into the wall of the courtyard and collapsed in the rubble. And Hua ignored the young array master on the stretcher and crawled behind Changsheng and Jiji. Grabbing their collars, she used all her strength to drag them backward, wanting to get as far away from that terrifying figure on the wooden bridge as possible. Countless beads of ice shattered into catkins that drifted through the courtyard like willow catkins. It really did seem like they had arrived in the south, but there was a boundless chill in the air. Lord Heidi's terrifying figure walked over the bridge. The catkins of ice drifted away, not daring to touch his body. Heidi's expression remained indifferent as he gazed at Changsheng on the shore, but a ghostly fire seemed to be burning in the depths of his dark green eyes. He was a powerful figure of the demon race and had experienced countless major events in his life, but even he could not suppress his nervousness and excitement when he thought about how the Pope of the human race was about to die at his hand. The mist shrouding the lake and garden had already been replaced by monstrous demon chi. As if sensing the ripples in his mind, the demon chi also began to tremble, transforming into a cold wind. If one carefully observed, one might realize that the vast majority of this cold wind came from the broken monolith weapon in his hand. And Hua's pale face was suffused with determination. She lowered her head, refusing to look at that undefeatable foe, and continued to drag Changsheng and Jiji behind the wall. Suddenly, she realized that Changsheng's body had become much heavier and she could no longer move it. Then, a hand that was very clean, very warm, and very steady patted her arm twice. At the same time, a very clean, warm, and steady voice rang out. "I can still do it." The speaker was Chun Changsheng. He stood up and gazed at the bridge, his hand already gripping the sheath of his sword. The sword was called Stainless, and the sheath was called the Vault Sheath. Hidden within it were countless world-shaking swords, as well as his most powerful technique. The moment he gripped the sheath, a string of stone beads appeared on his wrist. This string of stone beads was simple and unadorned, even rather crude, and it gave off no ripples of qi. But as soon as Gigi's gaze fell on it, she felt her heart beating faster uncontrollably. She was a being of the highest level in the world. Even if she couldn't see through the true nature of these stone pearls, she was still naturally sensitive to them at such a close distance. What exactly were these stone pearls that shocked her? And Hua's cultivation level was not high enough to sense the uniqueness of these stone pearls, but she wholeheartedly devoted herself to the Tao, and her Tao heart was incomparably clear, allowing her to sense another qi even earlier. That aura also came from those stone pearls, but it wasn't the stone pearls themselves. Instead, it was hidden in another world very far away behind one of the stone pearls. Countless primitive, savage, barbaric, and even bloody auras seemed to be rushing over from there. Of the string of stone pearls on Chun Changsheng's wrist, he had given one to Luo Luo and then given half to Su Yurong. Now there were only a few left, strung together by a red string, but they did not seem sparse. This was because these stone pearls were the heavenly tome monoliths that he had obtained from the Garden of Zhou, so they had their own indescribable subtleties. The savage and bloody qi that Hua had sensed also came from the Garden of Zhou. Although he had still not been able to completely comprehend the secrets of the heavenly tome monoliths, and his companions in the Garden of Zhou might not be able to change the world, this was still his most powerful technique. Of course, besides this, he still had a letter that he had not opened. By relying on these techniques, he was confident that even if he could not defeat Haidi, he could at least hold out for a while. But if he used all these techniques and still could not change the course of the battle, what could he do? Before tonight, he had never thought about this problem. He had the experience of fighting Haidi, so he had been prepared. He had originally believed that these techniques would be enough to defeat him, but he had not expected that Haidi was even more powerful and terrifying than he had been in the last few years. His gaze fell on the broken monolith in Haidi's hand. The change had occurred because of this object. Otherwise, Gigi would have been able to hold out for a little longer, enough time for him to kill all the demon experts in the valley. This broken monolith was probably not a weapon that Haidi often used. At the very least, he had not seen it last year on the snowy plains. No matter how many techniques you have, you will definitely die in my hand tonight. Haidi stood on the bridge, indifferently saying, with the divine object in hand, "Who can stop me?" Was he speaking of this broken monolith? Previously, this broken monolith had smashed a crack into the green leaf in Gigi's hand. Although it was very small, it still gave her and Qin Changsheng an unprecedented shock. Because the green leaf was a world, a weapon that could oppose a world, that could even faintly destroy the objective reality of this world. What else could it be if not a divine object? Qin Changsheng very naturally recalled a certain scene from that night in the Mausoleum of Books. His martial uncle, the Pope's green leaf, drifted through the darkness and arrived in front of the Tianhai Divine Empress. The Tianhai Divine Empress had extended her hand to take something out of the Mausoleum of Books and rudely smashed it. Although the power of the two battles tonight and that night had been very different, they were truly very similar. The more he thought about it, the more Qin Changsheng found the broken monolith in Haidi's hand to be familiar, even feeling a sense of familiarity. Could this really be that heavenly tome monolith that had wandered about outside? This seemed to be the only conclusion, but there was still one thing that Qin Changsheng did not understand. If Haidi really was holding that heavenly tome monolith that had vanished for so many years, given his terrifying level of cultivation, as long as he used all his strength, he and Gigi would be utterly powerless to resist. They wouldn't even have the chance to grasp their sheaths, and prepare to use their final trump cards. Why had Heidi not done this? He was still talking on the bridge. Was he afraid of the Lee Palace's treasure? Or was he waiting for some sort of change? Just at this moment, the change truly did occur. The wadding of ice drifting through the courtyard suddenly vanished, because an extremely clear and cold zither note occupied every corner of the world. To the demons, the chance to kill the Pope of the human race could not be missed. Even if they had to pay the price of countless lives, they would not hesitate. At this moment, Heidi was still 10-some zhang away from this historic event that was certain to shake the world. He could finish it in a single breath. Logically speaking, even if the White Emperor or Shang Xingzhou personally came, they would not be able to stop his steps, even if he might be killed afterwards. But with this clear and cold sound of the zither, Heidi stopped. The zither note was extremely clear and cold, imbued with a bone-piercing chill. It was hard to say whether it represented the mood of the zither player. As the zither note fell, the bridge was covered in a thin layer of frost. If he wanted to cross it now, it would probably be rather slippery and difficult to traverse. Heidi's body was also covered in a layer of frost, making him seem like an ice sculpture. He slowly turned around, his movements abnormally difficult. He gazed at the place where the zither note had originated, his dark green eyes surging with an incomparably complex emotion. It was confusion, shock, and fear. Chapter 766. A part of the frost covering the wooden bridge was from the shattered beads of ice, the chill originating from Gigi's breathing, but another part came directly from that distant zither note. It was equally cold, perhaps even colder. There is actually an existence even colder than the dragon breath of the Black Frost Dragon. A human like Chun Changshan would find it very difficult to think of an answer, but to Heidi, the answer was obvious. Shuilao City was extremely cold, and that demon palace, eternally hidden in the shadows, was perpetually buffeted by frigid winds. His shock, confusion, and fear was precisely because he had thought of that place. He had known in advance that a change would occur tonight, but when the change really did come, he still found it somewhat unbearable. He had not expected that it would be that person who had come. It seems like the demons really don't like the cinnabar pill. To think that an important figure like Heidi would personally come. The Tang's 17th master looked down the mountain at the courtyard in the valley, a mysterious smile on his face. The Wenshui Tangs had paid an enormous price to find a few clues, confirming that the cinnabar pill originated from Gaiyang village, and then investigating this mountain valley. He had not intentionally leaked this extremely important piece of information. He had only closed his eyes for a moment, and this news had already spread to many places. The important figures of the imperial court had come, and the important figures of the demon race had also come. The news had come from the Mount Song Army headquarters, so the demons should have received it much later, but they had only been late by half a night, and the one who had come was a truly important figure. From this, one could see just how much importance Shuilao City placed on this matter. To the demons, the fact that the human race possessed such a miraculous medicine was completely unacceptable. In the last year of battle, the ratio of casualties on both sides had clearly begun to favor the human race. From 1 to 4 in the last 1,000 years, it had dropped to 1 to 3. 7. This number did not seem to have changed much, but what if it continued to be like this? What if the number of cinnabar pills increased? It had to be known that the war between the humans and demons had lasted for 1,000 years. Even the smallest change was highly likely to affect the overall situation. Thus, the demons would definitely think of a way to kill the master of the cinnabar pill and destroy the recipe. If this really happened, the Tang's 17th master would feel rather regretful, but he would also be extremely satisfied, just like now. As he spoke, the sword in his hand remained in the belly of the innkeeper of the Mount Song Inn. The shopkeeper gasped for breath and pain. Finally, he closed his eyes and stopped breathing. At this moment, he was standing on the edge of a cliff high up in the snowy mountains, surrounded by corpses. Only one person was still alive. The former bishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons was pale, his teeth chattering, and his head lowered, not even daring to glance at the Tang's 17th master. These corpses were all the Tang 17th Master's trusted subordinates, all of them from Shui, all of them personally killed by the Tang 17th Master. This was, of course, to silence the witness. The Tang 17th Master's scheme seemed like he wanted to borrow Chun Chongqing's blade to deal with Zhu Yi and the others, thus opening up the Tang clan's position in Tianliang County. But in truth, he wanted to kill Chun Chongqing. Not even the Shui Tangs could accept the murder of the Pope, so he could not leave behind any evidence. Even his trusted subordinates had to die. As for Zhu Yi, Ning Shiwei, and the people from the Tianhai clan, even if they grew suspicious, they would not be able to prove or accuse him of anything. On the contrary, in order to avoid the wrath of the Li Palace, they might even have to cooperate with him. Lord Haidi probably did not expect the master of the Cinnabar pill to be His Holiness, right? The current situation would not change. The demons had always wanted to kill the master of the Cinnabar pill. If they discovered that it was Chun Chongqing, they would naturally not allow him to live. When he thought about how the current pope was about to die before his eyes, the Tang's 17th master couldn't help but sigh. He gazed at the lake and garden down below, a happy smile on his face. Suddenly, the sound of a zither came from some place in the darkness, and the smile on his face gradually froze. The first place to hear the zither note was not that lake and garden, not that high cliff, but somewhere else. This place was 10 some li away from that courtyard, the only deserted mountain path to Gaoyang village. Zhu Yi, Ning Shiwei, Tianhai Zhani, and several hundred experts and soldiers had reorganized themselves here after retreating from the courtyard. It was unknown what they were preparing to do next. They heard the clear and cold zither note, but they did not care because their attention was completely drawn to the sound coming from 10 some li away. The thunderous boom, the quaking of the earth, the howling of wind and rain, and the clattering of swords all indicated that an extremely intense battle was taking place there. Those experts had come from the northern part of the mountains. To the north of the mountains was the land of demons. It was only natural that they were the demon experts. If his guess was correct, those demon experts were currently surrounding Chun Chongqing and the black-clothed girl. Logically speaking, both Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei should be rushing back to their rescue as quickly as possible. On one side was the Pope of the human race. On the other side were the demon experts. Even a 3-year-old child should know what to do, and there was no need to even think about it. But Zhu Yi was calmly gazing at some place in the darkness. Ning Shiwei was indifferently gazing at the snowy peaks, and Tianhai Zhani was frowning as if he was thinking about something very difficult. The mountain path was very quiet, and no one spoke for a very long time. It was very strange. Suddenly, Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei's expressions turned even more solemn. The sounds coming from the distant courtyard did not stop. Only now did they realize that Chun Chongqing's path of the sword had already reached such a powerful level. As for the black-clothed girl, legends truly were legends. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei glanced at each other, seeing the lingering fear in each other's eyes. It now seemed that if they had not conceded and retreated by the lake shore, instead attempting to rely on the strength of their side to forcefully attack, they would have been incapable of success. They would have only been charged with the crime of attempting to murder the Pope. Tianhai Zhani's cultivation level was much lower, so he could not sense the strength of Chun Chongqing and the black-clothed girl through the distant sounds and the changes in qi. So even though he knew what the strange silence on the mountain path meant, he still felt rather bored. He thought of that zither note that had suddenly appeared and then vanished, and gazed into the darkness in front of him. The darkness was instantly broken by the zither note, broken by the sound of footsteps. A straw shoe broke through the frost on the surface of the mountain path as it slowly walked over. Like shattering autumn leaves, it gave off a crisp sound that was very pleasing to the ear. The bare foot in the straw shoe was very small, as its owner was a girl of 12 or 13. The girl had a picturesque appearance and was very beautiful, but the space between her eyes was rather wide, and her pupils were slightly inclined towards the center of her brow, giving off a somewhat wooden feeling. A middle-aged scholar walked up from behind her. He had nothing on him, only a zither in his bosom. He didn't seem to move at all, but the strings of his zither began to gather and disperse on their own, releasing an extremely clear and cold zither note. Chapter 767. When the clear and cold zither music appeared a second time, Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei were both alarmed. They gazed at the girl and the middle-aged scholar walking out of the darkness, their faces grave and wary. For someone to appear in such a cold night, in such a remote mountain range, meant that they were no ordinary person. A subordinate had reported that the middle-aged scholar and the girl had once performed in an inn in Gaiyang village, and many people had seen them before. But Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei knew that they were no ordinary zither players, no ordinary singing girls. Just like the zither music lingering in the mountain range, it was assuredly not ordinary. Tianhai Zhani also knew that something was strange, but after encountering so many things tonight, he was already rather annoyed, numb, and unwilling to think too much about it. Moreover, in his view, given the strength of his side, even if they were forced to rest here, how could they not be able to do anything to them? No matter what scheme you have, this young master will not give you a chance to use it. I'll just use my formidable strength to kill you. Could you also be like Chen Changsheng, forcing all of us to sullenly kneel on the ground the moment you make an appearance, only able to leave? Is there a second pope in the human world? As Tianhai Zhani thought this, he casually waved his hand, causing the experts of the Tianhai clan to attack the girl and the middle-aged scholar. The zither music was still echoing in the darkness when two streams of light suddenly appeared and entered the group of experts. Countless flowers of blood blossomed. Severed limbs and chunks of flesh rained down, smashing against the snow-covered mountain path and creating flowers of blood. Two beauties appeared amidst the flowers of blood. One of them was completely naked, giving off a mature and charming feeling, while the other was wearing Gujian's sex dress, gentle and reserved. They gave off a completely opposite feeling, as if they were black and white. The only thing they had in common was that their hands were continuously dripping red blood onto the ground. This blood belonged to the experts of the Tianhai clan. The two beauties had also suffered some injuries, though they did not bleed. A clear light seeped out of their wounds and then gradually congealed. The wind was chilly, the ice and snow being trampled apart like autumn leaves. The two beauties respectfully moved to the side, allowing the wooden-faced girl to walk out from between them. Zhu Ye's pupils constricted and an abnormally solemn expression appeared on his face. He looked at the girl and said, "Could it be Princess Nank?" He had lived in Tianliang County for a long time, so he knew many secrets of the demon race. He very easily recognized that the two beauties had spiritual bodies, so they should be the rumored Nank's two wings. Then, the girl who sang in the inn of Gaiyang village was obviously the youngest princess of the demon race, Nank. It was rumored that during the rebellion in Xiulao City, the demon lord was struck down into the abyss by the combined might of Black Robe and the demon master. She was also heavily injured, so she took the enormous risk of using her peacock true body to break through the seals and then vanished. No one knew where she went or if she was still alive. Who would have thought that she would appear in this desolate snowy ridge tonight? Zhu Yi knew that he was truly in trouble today. Speaking of which, he would rather return to that courtyard and confront Hai Di than meet Nank. Nank's talent was too strong, and her body flowed with the true blood of the peacock. In battle, she could often display a destructive power that far surpassed her true level. Of course, she was not as terrifying as Hai Di, but the problem was that she was too fast. If he encountered Hai Di, even if he was no match, Zhu Yi could still think of a way to leave or escape. But in front of Nank, he could not think of these things. He could only think of how to defeat her. If it were just Nank tonight, even with her two wings, Zhu Yi believed that his side had enough strength to defeat her. The problem was, "You are the rumored elder of the Candle Shadow Shamans?" Zhu Yi turned to the middle-aged scholar and asked, "Wasn't it said that you were already killed in the Garden of Zhou?" The middle-aged scholar lowered his head and gazed at the zither strings swaying in the wind. He seemed somewhat intoxicated and paid no attention to Zhu Ye's question. As Zhu Yi revealed the girl's true identity, the mood on the mountain path became extremely tense and oppressive. Tianhai Zhani's face was rather pale. Logically speaking, Zhu Yi should have been completely focused on Nank, so his words to the middle-aged scholar were completely superfluous. How could a person like him say superfluous words? Ning Shiwei understood his words and made a gesture with his hands behind his back. Without any warning or order, the crossbowmen of the Mount Song Army headquarters, under the cover of the experts of the emotion-severing sect and the Tianhai clan, quickly finished cocking their crossbows and pulled the triggers at the demon experts on the mountain path. Like a torrential rain, the crashing sounds instantly drowned out the sound of the zither. Countless divine crossbow bolts imbued with sacred light drowned out the figures of Nank, the middle-aged scholar, and the two beauties. But in reality, before the rain of crossbow bolts had even descended, the two beauties had already vanished. They transformed into two balls of light, and then into countless fragments that floated behind Nank and reformed. A pair of wings formed on Nank's back. The green wings lightly flapped, tearing apart the cold wind and transforming into countless streams of green light. She weaved through the rain of crossbows like a bolt of lightning. Other than Su Yurong, no one in the world was faster than her. Not even the rain of crossbows was faster than her. In her eyes, they were as slow as falling leaves. No one could clearly see Nank's figure. They could only see those green streams of light, only see those streams of light arrive among the crowd. The divine crossbows snapped, red lines appeared on their necks. Blood splashed into the night sky, severed ears flew, and groans rang out. With a shattering sound, several dozen figures slumped to the ground. The green streams of light gradually vanished, and Nank's figure appeared. She stood amidst the corpses, her green wings slowly flapping behind her. Blood slowly dripped from the Southern Cross sword. Whether it was the sword or the wings, they both made her seem even more petite, even more terrifying. She looked at Zhu Yi and the others with an indifferent expression. Your Highness truly is a genius of the demon path. Other than Su Yurong, no one is faster than you. Zhu Yi narrowed his eyes and said, but you're still too young. No matter how fast you are, you're still no match for us. Hearing Su Yurong's name, Nank silently thought it over, then walked over. Everyone felt fear at the sight of the petite figure and the pair of wings, even though Zhu Yi had sounded very confident just now. Let's put our lives on the line and see who will survive today, Zhu Yi sorrowfully said. Ning Shiwei indicated for Tianhai Zhani to stand behind him. Upon seeing this, Zhu Yi confirmed that Ning Shiwei had truly understood his words and felt a little more at ease. Tianhai Zhani was rather surprised, but at the same time, he was filled with gratitude. Nank walked to a place 10 zhang in front of them. In truth, Zhu Yi was correct. If Nank really was as strong as the rumors said, then even if she had not recovered from the heavy injuries she had suffered in Shualao City's rebellion, no matter how fast she was, she could not possibly defeat 2 upper-level star condensation human experts, let alone so many people present. But for some reason, Nank's expression was still as wooden as ever, without the slightest change. What happened next seemed to be a sort of explanation. Ning Shiwei suddenly grabbed Tianhai Zhani's collar. Tianhai Zhani paled in fright. Just when he was about to resist, he realized that Zhu Ye's finger had at some point landed on his ethereal palace. His body was incredibly stiff. Unable to resist, he became a stone. Ning Shiwei lifted him up and forcefully smashed him towards Nank. Chapter 768. Tianhai Zhani realized that he was flying. Then, he realized that he had regained control of his body. He subconsciously began to wave his arms like a dancing puppet. It was rather laughable, but this still could not change his trajectory. As he watched Nank's small face get closer and clearer, an expression of despair appeared on his face, and he closed his eyes. He had fallen into Nank's hands, but he was not dead. Nank grabbed the front of his shirt and raised him into the night sky. Tianhai Zhani opened his eyes, his body trembling uncontrollably as he let out a mournful whine. Nank tilted her head and examined him, her wooden eyes somewhat perplexed, somewhat confused as to what was going on. Tianhai Zhani was even more confused as to what was going on, his fear and confusion reaching the extreme. Nank looked past him to the other side. Whether it was the soldiers and experts of the Mount Song army, the emotion-severing sect, or the Tianhai clan, they were all at a loss as to what was going on. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei were no longer on the mountain path. 2 gusts of wind could be heard from the distant mountains in the darkness, and one could occasionally hear a pine tree being smashed and snapped. One figure was rushing down the cliff into the valley, while the other was madly rushing up the snowy peak. In a few moments, those 2 figures had already traveled several hundred zhang. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei had left. They had left with such determination that they simply did not care about the fate of their subordinates and trusted aides. It was obvious that this had been their plan all along, that they had come to a tacit understanding. At the very beginning, Zhu Ye's question to the middle-aged scholar and their conversation had all been a smokescreen. They had thrown Tianhai Zhani at Nank to buy a little more time. They had fled in 2 different directions to buy a little more time. Everything had been for the sake of escaping. Zhu Yi had never thought about staying and fighting with Nank. It was not because he feared Nank's strength, but because he could not see through the other person. That middle-aged scholar. It was rumored that the Candle Shadow Shaman Elder at Nank's side was truly skilled in using the zither to suppress enemies. But Zhu Yi was confident that this person had died long ago in the Garden of Zhou. Who was that middle-aged scholar who played the zither? Zhu Yi thought of a certain possibility, but this conjecture was far too shocking, so even he didn't dare believe it. When the sky full of crossbow bolts rained down on the other side of the mountain path, he did not pay any attention to Nank's response at all. Instead, he stared at the middle-aged scholar. The middle-aged scholar only lowered his head to look at the zither in his bosom. He did not move, not even the zither strings moved, much less dodge. However, those divine crossbow bolts imbued with sacred light floated away as if they were afraid. Upon seeing this, Zhu Yi felt even more certain that his conjecture was correct. Even if there was only a 1 in 1,000 chance that the middle-aged scholar was the one he was thinking of, if he did not leave, he would definitely die here tonight. Therefore, he decided to escape without any hesitation, even if he appeared to be shameless and pitiful. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei vanished into the dark mountains like 2 stray dogs. The experts of the Mount Song Army headquarters and the emotion-severing sect were at a loss. They had no idea what was going on, much less what to do next. The members of the Tianhai clan watched as their young master fell into the hands of the demon princess, their nervousness reaching its peak. Tianhai Zhani looked into Nank's eyes, his fear reaching its peak. The shadow of death gave him an unimaginable courage. With a sobbing yell, he swung his hands at Nank's forehead. He seemed to be in a panic, his fists seemingly without any pattern, but no one knew that these 2 fists were the supreme technique of the Tianhai clan, grasping the sparrow's tail. 2 streaks of light tore through the gloomy darkness. Tianhai Zhani's fist struck Nank like lightning bolts, accurately striking their target. 2 extremely clear and muffled thumps resounded through the mountain path. Nank did not dodge his fists, not even attempting to dodge. She continued to impassively stare at him. In the breeze, a strand of black hair drifted up from her temple. She had not been severed, so she was naturally uninjured. No one would avoid the waving forelimbs of a praying mantis on the road, and she would also ignore Tianhai Zhani's attack. Although the supreme technique of the Tianhai clan was very powerful, his fists were powerless. The insurmountable gap between cultivation levels would render all techniques meaningless. Tianhai Zhani was in utter despair. He wanted to say a few words to beg for her to spare his life, but he could not speak. Nank released her grip and put him down. She walked to the edge of the mountain path and gazed at the snowy mountains in the darkness, but the 2 wings on her back could not be seen. She gazed at the 2 figures rapidly departing from the peak and the bottom of the cliff, silently thinking, these 2 should be important figures of the human race, but they're both so shameless. It's no wonder that the divine race, which has ruled over the north of the continent for more than 1,000 years, has never been able to defeat the human race. If this is the case, in the future, I have to kill them as soon as possible in such a situation. Tianhai Zhani gazed at her back, somewhat perplexed as to what was going on. Then he suddenly felt something sweet in his throat, and then his heart felt somewhat cold. He lowered his head and saw that one feather was stuck in his throat while the other was deeply embedded in his chest. The feather was green and seemed particularly bewitching in the inky darkness. It was grasped in the hands of the two demon beauties. With two soft sounds, the green feather vanished and the two demon beauties dissipated into countless specks of light. They then reassembled on the side of the mountain path, transforming back into wings that lightly flapped. Tianhai Zhani knelt on the ground, his hands covering his throat and chest. He watched as the blood dyed green by poison seeped through his fingers as he gradually stopped breathing. Nank did not even glance at him. She continued to stare at the two figures in the mountain range. Zhu Yi and Ning Shiwei had fled in completely opposite directions. Even if she possessed the most inconceivable speed in the world, she could only catch up to one of them in these snowy mountains. Moreover, with her level of strength, she did not dare claim that she could win against just one of them. After all, those two were true human experts, not Tianhai Zhani. She very naturally turned to the middle-aged scholar, asking for instructions on what to do. The middle-aged scholar ignored her. His head was lowered, his eyes focused on the zither strings that trembled despite the lack of wind. Nank understood. Her wings madly flapped and the wind and snow danced. She transformed into a green streak of light and vanished into the darkness. Everyone said that descending a mountain was more difficult than ascending a mountain, but when speed was truly required, everyone knew that ascending a mountain was not as fast as running down a cliff. But Zhu Yi still chose to ascend the mountain, not because he was giving way to Ning Shiwei, but because he knew that tonight's escape did not depend entirely on speed. The faster one went, the safer it would be. If he had to chase after two groups of fugitives, he would definitely go after the fastest one first. Sure enough, in the following period of time, he did not hear the sound of wind breaking behind him, nor did he see that green stream of light. He rejoiced, but he did not dare to relax. Circulating his true essence, he used the lightness technique of the emotion-severing sect to its fullest extent. In a few moments, he had traveled 10-some li and arrived at the edge of the snowy peak. As long as he ran another several hundred zhang, he would be able to climb over the mountain, see the lights of Gaiyang village, and alarm the garrison there. His breathing was already very rapid, and he could even hear the heaviness hidden within it. The slightly illuminated night sky above the mountain appeared before his eyes, giving him new strength in his almost exhausted true essence and increasing his speed. At this moment, an extremely soft sound came from behind him. It was like a thin piece of ice falling on another piece of ice, like the wind cutting through a thread of ice, like someone plucking the strings of a zither. It was an illusion. It had to be an illusion. Zhu Yi said to himself. He did not turn around, continuing to madly run forward. His breathing grew more and more rapid, heavier and heavier, gradually tinged with despair. Chapter 769. The zither note that Zhu Yi had heard was naturally not an illusion. Although the zither note came from the distant mountain range and was rather ethereal, it possessed an objective truth that could not be denied. It was cold, clear, and fine like hair, like a blade so sharp. The cold wind over the mountain range was severed. The dim light of the distant lanterns of Gaiyang village was also severed, and the most stubborn snow lotus in the snow was also severed. Several cracks appeared on Zhu Ye's shoes and then sank deep into them, breaking through his skin, flesh, and white bone. His feet were severed at the ankles. Carried by the remaining inertia, he flew toward the gap in the mountain range. He landed somewhere unknown, leaving behind two streams of blood in the darkness. Zhu Yi could no longer cross the mountain range and enter the human world. He fell into the snow, gasping for breath, his body heaving up and down. This fall had been very heavy, and a broken leg was an extremely serious injury. However, the reason he lay on the ground, motionless, was not because of this, but because of despair. The zither note had drifted over from 10-some li away. It was so faint, yet had easily severed his legs. The identity of the middle-aged scholar was already on the verge of being revealed. He buried his face in the snow and let out a muffled howl of pain. He was like a wounded beast that had no courage to counterattack, only endless regret. The sounds of fighting and screams could be heard from the distant mountain range. It was probably Nank casually harvesting the lives of those people on the mountain path. The sounds of fighting suddenly vanished, and the screams gradually grew softer until everything fell silent. Zhu Yi also fell silent. With some difficulty, he turned around and gazed at the starry sky that was so close to the snowy peaks that it was particularly clear. He sighed. If he had not been greedy for the cinnabar pill, given his status, how could he have come to such a remote mountain range? How could he have encountered such a terrifying enemy? Just how many people had already died because of greed? How many more would it kill? The ice and snow were crushed like withered leaves in autumn, giving off a crisp and pleasant sound. Zhu Ye's body and mind relaxed with this sound, but his eyes gradually brightened. Nank walked in front of him, her wings gently flapping behind her, bringing with them a chilly breeze. The Southern Cross sword had already been separated and was gripped by her two hands. The blade was still dripping with blood, probably from Ning Shiwei and those people. Zhu Yi calmly gazed at her, his two hands gripping the most precious magical artifacts of the emotion-severing sect. Nank attacked. Zhu Yi attacked. On the snow-capped peak, illuminated by the starlight, a dull and violent collision sound rang out. More than a dozen bulges appeared on the thick snow slope, as if some kind of monster was about to drill its way out. The accumulated snow was lifted up and danced wildly in the air, blocking the starlight and making the surroundings seem especially gloomy. Only the occasional sword light would illuminate a corner of the place. Indistinctly, the sound of a zither could be heard. The world suddenly became quiet, and the wind and snow gradually subsided. Only the snow on the mountain slopes continued to slide down, making a rustling sound. At the highest point of the mountain range, Nank's sword stabbed into Zhu Ye's abdomen. Zhu Yi did not lower his head, nor did he look at her. Instead, he was looking at a certain place in the distance. The sword in his body was really cold, but the ethereal and almost unreal zither music was even colder. The cold reminded him of the story his uncle had told him. In that story, there was a demon city in the north of the snowy plains. That demon city was always shrouded in darkness, just like the darkness that was gradually occupying his eyes. Nank carried Zhu Ye's corpse back to the mountain path. The mountain path was covered in blood and frost, and several hundred corpses were scattered to the sides. The middle-aged scholar was not playing the zither, but eating something. At his feet was half a corpse. From the shoes and the remaining armor, it was probably Ning Shiwei's. Nank handed Zhu Ye's corpse to the middle-aged scholar. The middle-aged scholar used his two hands to hold Zhu Yi, lowered his head, and began to eat. It was like the sound of a cat eating leftovers, like the sound of gravel falling into the mud. Blood constantly dripped from his fingers. It didn't take long before Zhu Ye's corpse vanished, leaving nothing behind. The wind ruffled the middle-aged scholar's clothes, revealing the slight bulge in his abdomen. He closed his eyes and remained quiet for a very long time. He seemed to be savoring the aftertaste, and also seemed to be thinking about something. As expected of Zhu Luo's nephew, although his cultivation is lacking, he still has some essence of the moon. He could be considered a small supplement, much stronger than this general. The middle-aged scholar opened his eyes and looked at Ning Shiwei's ruined body at his feet, a hint of disdain on his face. He took a snow-white handkerchief from his sleeve and slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his lips. His movements were very graceful, and then he walked up the mountain path into the darkness. Nank's expression did not change in the slightest as she watched this bloody and terrifying scene. She followed him forward. With the clear sound of the zither, they arrived at the snowy valley 10-some li away. Those demon experts who had surrounded Qin Changsheng were covered in sword wounds, their right hands crippled, but they were not dead. When they saw the middle-aged scholar and Nank, it was like they had seen real ghosts, their faces abnormally pale. Nank glanced at them and said, "Die." Several streaks of green blood burst out, and the few figures that were like buildings fell heavily into the snow. Upon hearing Nank's words, those demon experts unhesitatingly committed suicide. The garden in the snowy valley had already been reduced to ruins. The misty spring lake had already dried up into a large pit, and the wooden bridge had been broken into several dozen pieces, like a snake that had been coiled for centuries. The pavilion had long since disappeared, the frozen beads of ice filling the air with a rather loathsome sight. Chen Changsheng and Zhizhi stood on the opposite side of the lake, and Hua had rescued the general from the ruins, and the two were nervously standing guard in front of the stretcher. Haidi stood in the lake, his hand gripping that weapon that looked like a broken monolith. He seemed to be the center of this world, but in his eyes, whether it was this world or the vast real world, the center would always be the middle-aged scholar who had just arrived. Nank ignored him and said to Chen Changsheng, "I help you resolve many problems. You owe me a favor." Zhizhi did not recognize her, but from the tone she used to speak to Chen Changsheng, she seemed to recognize her. After examining her for a few moments, she suddenly came to her senses, a boundless wariness surging from her eyes. "You are that peacock." Nank's expression was somewhat dazed as she asked, "You recognize me?" "Chen Changsheng mentioned you." Zhizhi raised 3 fingers and placed them between her eyes. "He said that the space between your eyes was too wide, that there was clearly something wrong with you." Nank thought about it, unsure whether she should get angry or not. Her gaze returned to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng did not look at her. His gaze had always been fixed on the middle-aged scholar. Before this middle-aged scholar had even appeared, he had already attracted all of Haidi's attention, even making Haidi feel boundless fear. In the entire world, there could not be more than 5 people that could make Haidi so afraid. Coincidentally, he had once met this middle-aged scholar, so he knew who he was. That meeting had been in Mount Han. Tonight, it was still in Mount Han, even though the two places were separated by 1,000 li. It truly was a very coincidental, truly not good. He sighed. Chapter 770. Tonight, this sort of situation had already occurred several times. When Zhu Yi and the others arrived by the lake and realized that the master of the cinnabar pill was Chen Changsheng, they had also let out a similar sigh. In the snowy mountains, Zhu Ye's feet had been severed by the zither music. As he gazed at the starry sky and waited for death, he gloomily sighed. At this moment, Chen Changsheng looked at the middle-aged scholar and couldn't help but sigh. The gap between the two sides was too great. Even if one used all their methods, exhausted all their intelligence, even shed their blood, they would still be unable to reverse the situation. They would naturally be unwilling, but they would also be helpless to the extreme. All sorts of emotions intertwined, ultimately transforming into a soft sigh. Chen Changsheng was both shocked and confused. Everyone said that the abyss was endless, so why was he still alive and standing before him? As he thought of these things, he silently glanced at Haidi. From a moment he heard that clear and cold zither note. Haidi had turned his head and made no further movements. His gaze had always been fixed in the direction of the zither note, the place where the middle-aged scholar was standing. This demon personage was currently very stiff, both in body and mind, but Chen Changsheng was sure that he knew that Chen Changsheng had glanced at him. This glance was a question. Should we work together? The humans and demons had fought for many years, both sides suffering grievous casualties and a deep grudge. This was especially true after the agreement between Emperor Taizong and the demon lord was torn apart 1,000 years ago. Unless there were some extreme circumstances, like the unforgettable hatred of the Liang clan being slaughtered or the old matter of Zhou Dufu, the experts of the two sides never worked together again. Shang Xingzhou had secretly presided over the coup of the Mausoleum of Books and had only maintained a tacit agreement with the important personages of Shualao City not to interfere with each other. They would never directly borrow strength from each other. No one could endure 1,000 years of infamy. If Chen Changsheng wanted to work together with Haidi, he did not need to worry about this problem, because the identity of the middle-aged scholar would make the entire continent agree with his actions. Moreover, there is a certain possibility that Haidi would agree to work together with him. More than 2 years ago, after the rebellion in Shualao City, the demon lord had died. Nank had disappeared, and countless imperial ministers loyal to the old government had been executed, but Hai-Di had survived, his reputation even greater than before. He now held the important authority of the demon army on the front lines. No matter how one looked at it, he was assuredly one of the rebels. If he wanted to survive tonight, he had to team up with Chun Changsheng. The allure of killing Chun Changsheng, the Pope of the human race, was truly immense, but to Hai-Di, killing the middle-aged scholar was clearly more important than anything else in the world. Hai-Di did not respond to Chun Changsheng's questioning gaze. He continued to stare at the middle-aged scholar, wary and fearful, his hand gripping the broken monolith very tightly. The dilapidated garden was very quiet. Everyone present knew very well what this silence meant. Nank's eyes became colder and colder. The color of the wings that slowly swayed in the night wind became darker and darker, appearing more and more bewitching. At this moment, the middle-aged scholar's voice rang out. "I'm dying." His voice was unusual. He was indifferent, dignified, and supreme. There was nothing special about him. But if one were to look closely at his face, one would notice something very unusual. The middle-aged scholar's face seemed to be forever shrouded in a faint layer of darkness. In the darkness, countless embroidered characters glowed with golden light slowly fluttered in the air. Below the embroidered characters was a painting of mountains and rivers, at one moment a desert, at another a blue sea. As his brows and lips moved, the blue sea would surge and the desert would rush. The scenery was incomparably vivid, yet it was also abnormally cold and desolate because there was not a single person in this myriad scenery. And when he said, "I'm dying," the great thousand worlds also grew much dimmer, as if they would soon return to silence. Thus, Qin Changxing knew that he was speaking the truth. He recalled that many years ago in the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, in that room filled with all sorts of plum blossoms, he had heard Mei Lisha say something similar. More than 2 years ago, he couldn't remember if it was in the palace or the Orthodox Academy, but he had also heard his martial uncle the Pope say these words. He thought it over, then said to the middle-aged scholar, "As long as one lives, one will die." The middle-aged scholar replied, "The fourth wondrous sentence of the essay on the origin of the Tao." Chun Changsheng did not ask what the first 3 wondrous sentences were, because every person who studied the Taoist canon would have their own understanding and comprehension. Of course, he would also not be shocked that this scholar had so easily recognized that this sentence came from the essay on the origin of the Tao, because the entire world knew that this person was extremely knowledgeable, the most extraordinary scholar of Xiulao City after Tungus. But who would truly be willing to die? Like Tian Hai, or Yin, or those old friends from even earlier. No matter how calm they appeared, how could they be willing to obediently walk into that darkness? I was even less willing, so I crawled out from that terrifying darkness and came here to see you. As he slowly spoke, the darkness on the middle-aged scholar's face grew darker and darker, making it harder and harder for one to look directly at him. Gigi heard the tone of his voice and vaguely guessed at his identity. She did not dare to believe it, and her voice began to tremble. "You just what does Sir want to do? Your father once said that you didn't like to study, that you had a simple and foolish personality. Tonight, it seems to be true." The middle-aged scholar had a gentle expression as he spoke to her like a senior. "Relax, for the sake of your father. I naturally won't make things difficult for you." Through these words, Gigi confirmed his identity. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak. She subconsciously turned to Qin Changsheng, her eyes filled with confusion and helplessness. Countless years ago, a mighty black frost dragon did not want to inherit the position of leader of the dragon race and journeyed to the continent. On the continent, it encountered many equally mighty existences, and then it died in the Garden of Zhou. That was her father. Of those mighty existences, only one was her father's friend, or perhaps it was better to say that her father only admired that one. With the passage of time, the great Zhou had changed several emperors. The Mount Li sword sect had changed 3 sect masters, and the Tang clan had changed its head twice. Only that person forever sat at the highest point of the divine palace. As a result, Many ordinary people had the mistaken belief that since ancient times, in the entire world, the demon race had only had one, the Demon Lord. Yes, the middle-aged scholar was the Demon Lord. He was the most powerful and most talented sovereign in the history of Xiulao City, the emperor that the demon race prostrated themselves to, and the enemy that the human race feared the most. If not for the fact that countless geniuses had suddenly appeared in the human race at the beginning of his reign, the demon race would have long ago occupied the entire continent under his leadership. But whether it was Zhou Dufu, Chen Xuanba, Emperor Taizong, or Wang Zhizi of 1,000 years ago, or Tianhai, Yin, and Shang of 1,000 years later, none of them could truly defeat him. Even when facing the human experts that surged forth like a sea of stars, he still led the demon race to stand firm on the northern continent, just like the eternal darkness over Xiulao City. From every angle, he was the mightiest demon lord of his generation. Whether it was since ancient times, or in the heavens above and the earth below, don't respectfully walk into that darkness. Of course, it comes from that poem. Interstellar travel is so good because of that poem. It's the complete opposite of the last point. Nolan needed to make a conclusion that everyone could accept, which I find extremely regrettable. I thought that this sort of attitude was the sharpest and most powerful. Chapter 771. 1,000 years ago. It was him. 1,000 years later, it was still him. But in the end, the Demon Lord was unable to escape the laws of history and fell in a rebellion. Of course, according to the rules of history, the initiator of this rebellion must be his most trusted subordinate. As the left and right arms of the Demon Lord, military advisor Blackrobe, and the Demon Commander had spent countless years vying for power, opposing each other with equal harshness, and their hatred was extremely deep. It was only because of the Demon Lord's supreme prestige that peace was barely maintained, and was this not the result that the Demon Lord was most willing to see, even deliberately indulging in? Who could have imagined that they would join hands and launch a most secretive attack on the Demon Lord? The Demon Lord who had returned from Mount Han had not yet recovered from his heavy injuries, and now he had suffered such a bitter betrayal, falling into the endless abyss. In the end, the throne fell onto his youngest son. At the very beginning, both the nobles of Xiulao City and the humans of the south believed that this young Demon Lord was a puppet pushed out by Blackrobe and the Demon Commander. Only when divine General Han Qing was lured to death by this young Demon Lord through an extremely sinister method did the entire continent finally understand that he was the true instigator of this rebellion. For the sake of the imperial throne, brothers killing each other or father and son killing each other were not rare occurrences in both the demon race and the human race. In short, the Demon Lord that no one, from Zhou Dufu and Emperor Taizong to the Tianhai Divine Empress and Yin and Shang, had ever been able to truly defeat, ultimately fell into the stinking gutter of history, defeated at the hands of his own son. But didn't he die in the endless abyss? Why would he appear in this snowy ridge at this time? As they looked at the middle-aged scholar by the lake, Hua and the deputy general paled and found it difficult to breathe. This was the question that everyone present wanted to know the answer to the most. Nang stood in front of Qin Changsheng and said nothing. She knew very well just how painful of a price she had to pay to climb out of that endless abyss. Even she did not want to recall it again. The Demon Lord naturally would not explain. He said to Qin Changsheng, "I'm only about to die, but I'm not dead yet. I don't want to die, so I came to find you." Qin Changsheng asked, "Why did you come to find me?" The Demon Lord expressionlessly said, "I've come to seek your help." "You want the cinnabar pill?" Gigi suddenly asked. Her voice was a little tentative, but it could also be said to be hopeful. "It's not enough. There's too little blood mixed into the cinnabar pill." The Demon Lord's answer shattered her last hope. Haidi and Hua and the Deputy General couldn't help but be stunned by these words. There was blood in the cinnabar pill? Whose blood? If the Tang's 17th master heard these words, he would immediately understand that the crystalline red threads in the cinnabar pill were not blood coral, not the blood of the little black dragon, but Qin Changsheng's blood. After a while, and Hua and the Deputy General glanced at each other, seeing the shock in each other's eyes. They had also thought of the same thing. In the past few years, the story revolving around the Tianhai Divine Empress, the venerable Taoist master Shang Xingzhou, the emperor, and the pope had long since spread to the world. Through the guidance and propaganda of the orthodoxy, everyone knew that His Holiness the Pope possessed an innate sacred body and that his true blood contained countless sacred lights. It turned out that the Pope had used his own blood as medicine. It was no wonder that the cinnabar pill could regrow bones and cure the dying. It was no wonder that the number of cinnabar pills was so limited that only a small bottle could be refined every month. It was no wonder that the Pope had not spread this recipe. It was simply impossible to imitate this pill. Besides the Pope, who could provide this medicine? As she looked forward, Anhua felt that Chun Chongqing's figure had grown even larger, bathed in the starlight, incomparably divine. I am using my blood to save all living beings. What sort of benevolence is this? What sort of emotion is this? When she thought about how she had been very dissatisfied with the master of the cinnabar pill in the Mount Song Army headquarters, and even how disappointed she had been earlier, Anhua felt deeply ashamed. Chun Chongshang said to the demon lord, "If I knew that Sir was still alive, I would have been a little more careful, because the cinnabar pill contains my blood. This cannot be hidden from you." Back then, the demon lord had taken an enormous risk to travel tens of thousands of li to Mount Han precisely to eat him. After the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, the Pope had said to him that the only person in the world that still dared to lust for his true blood was the demon lord. The demon lord had an intense desire, and he also had the means, the courage, to resolve the poison that might be hidden in his true blood. Gigi looked at Chun Chongsheng, extremely worried and somewhat angry. In her view, if not for the fact that Chun Chongsheng had lost too much of his true blood over the past year to refine that lousy pill, severely affecting his cultivation, Hai Di would not have been able to keep them here. Thus, they naturally would not have needed to face such a terrifying situation. The demon lord calmly said, "Since I am still alive and have allowed me to find you, perhaps this is your fate." Chun Chongqing looked into his eyes and said, "Sir should be well aware that when I was born, I was a poisonous fruit." The corners of the demon lord's lips perked up, revealing an enchanting smile. The mountains and rivers on his face suddenly brightened, and his voice became exceptionally gentle and pleasant. "I'm a man. In the end, I have more courage than little Tian Hai, and I have more years than her, have seen more of the world. Perhaps I can resolve these problems." Chun Chongsheng vaguely understood what he meant and said, "But you are also not confident." The demon lord replied, "Even if I am not confident, it now seems that you are confident." Chun Chongsheng silently gazed at the wisps of ice drifting down in front of him. The demon lord looked into his eyes and said, "The fact that the cinnabar pill did not poison those human experts to death means that you have already found a way to remove the poison in your true blood." Chun Chongsheng silently thought to himself, "What poison could there be? It's just a conflict between different divine laws." Gigi couldn't help but ask, "Do you really want Chun Chongsheng to remove the poison of his own accord and then offer himself up to you to eat? Why not? Once I eat you, my old wounds will be healed, and I will be even stronger than I was in the past. I will naturally return to Shualao City and seize the throne. Although I am confident that I will obtain the final victory, not even I can completely see through Black Robe and Big Girl's brains, and that unfilial son is a pretty good madman. Thus, this will assuredly take a very long time, assuredly plunged into a bitter battle. It is highly likely that my divine race will not be able to advance south for several hundred years. Is this not the greatest benefit to your human race?" The demon lord calmly said to Chun Chongsheng, "The Taoist faith has always emphasized benevolence in ruling the world. You, as the Pope, did not hesitate to use your blood as a pill for the sake of saving all living beings. Why not transform yourself into a pill and let me consume it? I can also save all living beings and even more. Your death can be exchanged for several hundred years of peace. Why not?" This was clearly an absurd proposal, but as he slowly said it, it seemed somewhat reasonable. Gigi could not bear to listen any longer and yelled, "Then why don't you go die yourself?" Chapter 772. The demon lord naturally would not die just because of a few words from someone else, as he had a callous personality and an unyielding will. Of course, generally speaking, even if one didn't have this special trait, no one would die because of someone else's words. This had nothing to do with selfishness. It was related to the nature of life. But GZ was worried about Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng had been well-versed in the Taoist canon since he was a child, and he cultivated the Tao of following his heart. His conduct was always different from others, and after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, there were new changes. He was living too indifferently now. In other words, before that, he valued his life immensely. Whether it was his diet, his daily life, or his cultivation, they were all based on this aspect. But now, he began to drink alcohol. Although not much, he ate a lot of beef and mutton. Although he still didn't eat much roasted meat, he didn't care as much as before. He seemed to care more about what he could do with his life. Thus, he had left the capital for the greater good, becoming the first exiled pope in history. That was why he had appeared on the battlefield of the snowy plains last year, fighting bloody battles with the wolf cavalry and almost dying there. This was why the cinnabar pill had appeared. After leaving the capital, before that, I kept thinking about what I should do now that I could live for so many years. At the very beginning, I wanted to help the human race on the battlefield, but later I discovered that this wasn't right because my cultivation and strength weren't enough to change the course of the battle. Although my medical skills weren't bad, they weren't that special when compared to the divine priests and doctors of the sacred hospital. There was a limit to what one person could do. In the end, I suddenly thought of making the cinnabar pill. He said to the demon lord, "I truly do want to save a few more people, but Sir is still wrong on one point. I have never thought about saving all living beings, as I do not have such a great ability. I can only save those concrete and visible people. Moreover, there is a very important problem. If I use my true blood to refine the cinnabar pill to save people, although it is somewhat taxing on my body, it will not cause me to die. You advise me to save all living beings, but I will have to pay the price of death, so I cannot accept your proposal." The demon lord said, "There is some truth in that last sentence." Chun Changsheng said seriously, "Most importantly, you said that eating me can make the demons unable to invade South for hundreds of years. For me, this is meaningless." The demon lord asked, "Oh, why is this meaningless?" Chun Changsheng replied, "Because we don't care if you go south or not. We were going north in the first place, to Shiwelao City." When he said this, his eyes were wide open and bright, like the endless waters of a lake, so real and so clean, so convincing, as expected of the youngest pope in history. He's much more hot-blooded and interesting than those old fellows from before. Of course, he's also much more childish. The demon lord smirked at him. "Do you really think that I'm asking for your opinion? You're not asking for my opinion. You're trying to convince me or weaken my will." Chun Changsheng said, "Because you know very well that even if you can kill me, you can't control me as easily as you did in the past. I have the ability to destroy my own body and burn all the blood in my body before you succeed. This will make you gain nothing and lose your last hope." In truth, he did not say that before the demon lord succeeded, he still had a chance to leave. This was because he did not want to alert the other party in advance. Most importantly, he wanted to try and see if he could bring the other humans here with him. The demon lord calmly gazed at him in silence for a very long time. The crisp clatter of metal on metal and an even colder voice rang out at the same time. "You owe us 2 lives. Nank threw the insignia of the Zhu clan and the insignia of the Mount Song army on the ground in front of Chun Changsheng." These words were even more sophistry and unreasonable than the demon lord's. Gigi pointed at Heidi and said, "We killed a few of your clan's traitors, and we've also delayed this big guy for you to deal with. How are we going to settle this debt?" Nank thought this over, but said nothing. Chun Changsheng was very gratified. He had never been skilled at arguing or unreasonable pestering, except in front of Su Yurong. In this aspect, he was always at a disadvantage against anyone, even the wooden Nank. Fortunately, He had no lack of experts in this aspect at his side. At the beginning, there was Luoluo, later on, there was Tang 36, and now there was Gigi. Nank seemed to understand something and added, putting aside the past, a life for a life is also fair. Surprised, Gigi asked, whose life are you prepared to use to exchange for Chun Chongsheng's? We won't touch you, Nank replied. That's naturally his own life. Gigi asked, what nonsense are you talking about? Nank calmly replied, we can kill him now, but if we don't kill him now, we'll be sparing his life and then having him use his life in exchange. This is very fair. You can do that? Gigi's eyes widened in disbelief. Nank looked at Gigi and asked, you don't understand? Gigi seriously replied, dog fart. Nank said, you have to be reasonable. Gigi said, you have to be shameless. There were countless girls in the world, but there was no question that Nank and Gigi were the strongest and most dangerous of them all. But when they quarreled, they were still two girls. It was rather laughable and made one feel very helpless. As they spoke, no one noticed that Chun Chongsheng had stealthily retreated a few steps. At this moment, he was only a few steps away from Ahua and the deputy general. He only needed to take 2 more steps to reach them. But just when he was prepared to move, a gust of cold wind blew by the lakeshore. The air stirred and countless fragments of light scattered behind him. The fragments of light condensed in the wind, transforming into a naked beauty and a well-bred girl dressed in a sword gown. They silently appeared behind Ahua and the deputy general, their hands on their throats. Ignoring Gigi, Nank expressionlessly said to Chun Chongsheng, now, you have 3 lives. From the very beginning, Chun Chongsheng had been thinking about how to send Ahua and the deputy general away. He had never imagined that Nank had already seen through his plans and had even made arrangements beforehand. This made him feel rather regretful. He thought, since Nank has appeared, how could I have forgotten about Nank's 2 wings? Gigi angrily called out. She had argued with Nank in order to cover Chun Chongsheng's movements, but she had failed, so she couldn't help but feel somewhat angry. The new demon beauty gently wrapped her arms around Ahua's neck, a pair of demon horns faintly visible amidst her waterfall of black hair. Paired with her beautiful and picturesque appearance, she was incomparably alluring. Gigi's little face reddened, and she spat again, saying, shameless masters indeed have shameless maids. These 2 beauties were spiritual bodies, which was why they had been able to hide from his and Gigi's senses and stealthily alter the situation. It was also precisely because they were spiritual bodies that they were especially sensitive. Seeing Gigi filled them with boundless fear, and even though Gigi called them shameless, they did not dare to do anything. The well-bred girl dressed in the sword gown slightly lowered her head, somewhat uneasy. The naked demon beauty was a little bolder and did not dare to retort. Instead, she chuckled and puffed out her chest, causing her soft parts to stand out even more and her 2 red spots to stand out even more. Gigi's demonic pupils constricted as she yelled, if he wasn't here, I would have frozen you and this woman into slags. The demon beauty froze, thinking, why does the dragon girl also hate the woman she's holding hostage so much? Anhua was very nervous and couldn't help but raise her head to look. Gigi looked at Anhua and hatefully said, what are you looking at? Aren't you the one who caused this trouble? Anhua's gaze fell on the nearby stretcher. As she looked at the array master on his last breaths, she thought, so many people have died tonight to save this person. She felt deeply ashamed and lowered her head in silence. Chun Chongsheng looked at Gigi and advised, is there a need to be so violent? Since they were conversing, they naturally looked at each other. Amidst the chatter, amidst the ice, the 2's gazes met. A voice suddenly resounded without the slightest sign. This voice was extremely complex, consisting of at least several hundred syllables. It was extremely strange and difficult to understand, and its chi was extremely distant. It seemed to come from an ancient era and contained an endless amount of information. This voice came from Gigi's lips. Her expression became abnormally solemn, even divine, and her black dress madly danced in the wind. A dragon's cry. There's something that I think is very important to say to everyone. 2 years ago, after the conclusion of the coming night novel, for a few technical reasons, the epilogue I wrote ended up being posted on Weibo and in the book review section. I don't know if all my readers have seen it, but last night, I also posted it on the coming night novel at the beginning of the novel in the public section. If everyone is interested, there is no harm in taking a look. If you haven't read the epilogue of Coming Night Novel, but are a reader of Coming Night Novel, I highly recommend everyone to take a look. In addition, there are quite a few loose ends in this chapter, mainly because the words I wanted to write are all forbidden. There was nothing that could be done, so I could only make it monotonous. I ask for everyone's understanding. All right, I've said enough nonsense. I wish everyone a happy life and that the stock market is booming. Chapter 773. Dragons were the divine beings of the highest level on the continent, and they possessed a crushing advantage over beings like monsters and spirits. Upon hearing the dragon cry, the demon beauty and the noble girl instantly paled and let out shrill screams. Their spirits instantly turned incorporeal, as if they would scatter at any moment. Qin Changsheng would not let this chance slip by. Using the Yeshur step, he stepped on the Jin star and broke through the void. With a wave of his right sleeve, he swept up in Hua and the deputy general. With this wave of his sleeve, he also seemed to sweep up the many stars in the night sky, because the world suddenly turned dark. In truth, this was because the many stars in the sky had been obscured. Gigi vanished from its original position. A black frost dragon appeared in the night sky. Its mountainous body completely obscured the starry sky above the snowy valley. This was an abnormally spectacular and terrifying sight. In Gaiyang village on the other side of the mountains, a drunken soldier saw this sight and thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. When he realized that it really was a black dragon, he fell unconscious. Soon after, even more people in Gaiyang village saw the black dragon stretching across the night sky. Cries of alarm and cries rose and fell, never ceasing. There were no cries of alarm in the snowy valley, much less cries. There was only the sound of something hard being frozen and torn apart. Countless strands of qi imbued with frost surged out of the mouth of the black frost dragon and fell to the ground. The fluttering ice that filled the sky was instantly frozen into even finer powder. The dried-up lake bottom was directly frozen and cracked. The newly emerged hot spring didn't even have time to disperse before it was frozen into a glaze-like ice liquid. Then that ice liquid was frozen and cracked once again. Wherever this cold qi went, all things in the world were frozen and then cracked apart. This was the Black Frost Dragon's strongest and most terrifying technique, the Deep Freeze Dragon's Breath. The Deep Freeze Dragon's breath was filled with frost and snow, but this was no ordinary frost and snow. It descended with incredible speed, more like a torrential rain that enveloped the entire lake and garden. With a frightening ripping sound, countless tiny tears appeared on Nank's dress, and the Southern Cross swords in her hands showed signs of being eroded by ice. Cracks could already be seen on the hilts of the swords. In an instant, she was injured. Blood that had been dyed in color by the frost splashed into the night sky. A sharp and ruthless howl burst out from her lips. The two demon beauties scattered, turning into countless tiny specks of light that floated over, desperately surging towards her back, forming a pair of demonic green wings. The green light illuminated the dark lake garden, drawing countless strange lines that were hard to distinguish. Nank was like a bolt of lightning, shuttling back and forth across the surface of the lake that was covered in snow and frost, dodging the deep freeze dragon breath that descended from the night sky. The seal that Wang Jitsa had placed on Gigi back then had not been completely removed, so she had not recovered all of her strength. Even if she had recovered, she was still not an adult black frost dragon, so the range of the deep freeze dragon breath was still limited. If Nank could fly out of the range of the deep freeze dragon breath, she would be able to escape from this calamity. At this moment, another ray of light appeared. It was not the green light drawn by Nank's wings in the darkness, but an even warmer red light, like the reflection of the setting sun on the surface of a river. Dusk filled the abandoned garden, and the setting sun shone in the night sky. With a clang, the dagger was unsheathed. Qin Changsheng used the hanging sunset of the three forms of Wen Shui that spread sword intent the fastest and had the widest range. Countless sword glows surged out of the sheath like 10,000 golden rays of light in the river, rising with the wind, or like the net cast by a fisherman on a small boat. The second move was the three songs of the fishing boat of the Mount Li sword style. Countless swords exploded forth, flying in every direction in the night sky. The incomparably sharp sword intents cut through everything in the world, forming an impenetrable net. No matter how fast Nank was, she could not break through this net of swords in a short amount of time and fly out of the snow-covered lake garden. When she broke through the net of swords, the dragon breath pouring down from the night sky would freeze and crack her demon body, or when she directly clashed with the dragon breath, her heart would be pierced by 10,000 swords. If nothing unexpected happened, this seemed to be her fate. But the demon lord was still present. For some reason, Chun Changsheng and Jiji paid no attention to the demon lord. From the very start, they had used all their strongest techniques on Nank. The reason for this was because Nank was the weakest link and also the link that was easiest for them to break through. As for the demon lord, with Qin Changsheng and Jiji's strength, even if they used all their techniques, they would not be able to shake him in the slightest. So why bother? Moreover, Haidi was still present. Whether or not he was willing to work together with the humans, he should be well aware that this was his best chance tonight, and also his last chance. The deep freeze dragon breath, imbued with frost, fell on the lake garden, and also fell on Heidi's armor. Countless oval-shaped marks of frost instantly appeared on the black armor, at the same time somewhat concealing the ripples of energy in his demon body. Haidi would naturally act, and he would use his strongest technique from the get-go. The mountainous broken monolith noiselessly smashed toward the demon lord. Haidi was well aware that even though the demon lord was heavily injured and his strength was far from his peak, he still could not defeat him. He had no intention of harming his opponent, only of holding him down for a few moments. As long as the demon lord could not save her, Chun Changsheng might succeed in killing Nank. Only then would they have a sliver of hope, 3 against 1. It was obvious that this was what Chun Changsheng had been thinking from the very start, and what Haidi wanted to do was cooperate with him. Just what was the demon lord thinking? He paid no attention to the broken monolith piercing through the air, nor did he look at his daughter, who might die at any moment in the midst of the deep freeze dragon breath and countless sword chi. Instead, he lowered his head to the ancient zither in his bosom, his slender and steady fingers lightly plucking on the strings. There was a clear and moving sound, and then a sudden rush. A chaotic sound rose up, like the rustling of 10,000 trees. Countless zither notes flew up from the zither, disregarding the terrifying deep freeze dragon breath, and flying in every direction. The starry sky was obscured by the black frost dragon, leaving the snowy valley and the lake garden pitch black, like the deepest night. Suddenly, countless sparks flashed in the darkness. The sparks came from the friction and collision, not from stone against stone, nor from metal against stone, but from the friction and collision of zither notes and swords. The countless swords that Chun Changsheng had thrown out with the hanging sunset and the 3 sings of the fishing boat encountered countless zither notes. Each time they met, there would be a crisp sound and then a spark. Several thousand swords, several thousand zither notes, several thousand clashes, several thousand sparks blossomed in the air. It was like a massive tree of fire had appeared out of thin air. These sparks descended from the sky, but they were not frozen by the deep freeze dragon breath. When they landed on the ground, they still burned. The ice and snow melted, and the beams would spat out embers. The world became much brighter, but it was precisely because of this that the darkness could be clearly seen, just like the demon lord's face. Chapter 774. In the midst of the sparks, the demon lord raised his head, the darkness and mountains covering his face coming to life. The broken monolith had already arrived in front of him. He glanced at the broken monolith. Just a glance. The broken monolith suddenly shrank 10 sometimes. This sight was extremely mystical, or perhaps bizarre. And he stretched out his hand. He stretched out his hand and caught the broken monolith. The broken monolith could not advance another inch. To put it more accurately, when his gaze fell on it, when his palm touched it, this legendary broken monolith was unwilling to advance another step. Because the broken monolith recognized who he was. The demon lord looked at Heidi and said, "Evil creature, you dare to use our weapon to attack us. I do not know whether to call you brave or foolish." Boundless fear surged out of Heidi's eyes. At the same time, countless plumes of dust gushed out from the chinks in his armor. This plume of dust was not because his demon body was exuding its chi into the world, but because it had been jolted out by a force. As the demon lord spoke, the hand holding the broken monolith shook 24,800 times. As one of the strongest experts of the demon race, Heidi's demon body was as tough as metal and stone, but he still could not endure such high-frequency vibrations. When the word foolish entered his sea of consciousness, Heidi's wrist holding the broken monolith shattered into gravel. Soon after, the bones in his arm also shattered, and then countless cracks appeared on his shoulder blade. It was like the bones of a cow or turtle that had been roasted for a very long time. The path of those cracks was mysterious and frightening. Demon bones had shattered, but his flesh was as good as new. Only Heidi himself could see the gravel, the stones, and the patterns in his arm. He knew that he could not continue to endure. He had to think of a way to escape. Some strange streams of demon blood sputtered out from his shoulder. His arm, as thick as a tree, flew into the sky. Heidi had cut off his own arm, and without hesitation, he turned and ran. The demon lord waved his sleeve. He seemed very casual and confident, like a scholar who had composed a new poem after drinking. In his sleeve was the broken monolith in his hand. With a light wave of his sleeve, the broken monolith struck Heidi's back in a casual yet unavoidable manner. With a cracking sound, it was as if a towering tree that had been corroded for countless years finally couldn't bear it anymore and collapsed from the middle. An extremely exaggerated protrusion had appeared on Heidi's chest, like a mountain that had suddenly risen from the fertile plains in a single night. An unimaginably majestic power wreaked havoc in his demonic body, instantly causing his internal organs to shift and split open. Even his demon core began to crack. Heidi was unable to endure this enormous force. He turned into a kite and miserably drifted toward the distant snowy peaks. Looking at the snowy peak that was getting closer and closer, his vision was blurry and his consciousness was in disorder. However, he did not forget an important question. Why was this happening? Where are the military counselors? Tonight, when he had come to receive an imperial edict, he had known beforehand that finding and killing the master of the cinnabar pill was not the entire mission. So when he saw Qin Changsheng, he was not too surprised. Even when he saw His Majesty, who should have died long ago, reappear in front of him, he was shocked, but he still had hope. Over the countless years, the demons had formed a certain psychological habit. Lord Blackrobe must have calculated everything. Heidi believed that since the military advisor had sent him, he had assuredly calculated this point and would naturally have made arrangements. Thus, he had dared to attack His Majesty. He had always believed that something else would happen. But nothing. Reality was just like the snowy peak that was getting closer and closer, cold and hard. In his final moment, Heidi suddenly recalled that night 2 years ago. On that night, he saw that old friend he had not seen for several centuries, or more accurately, his former master. Heidi understood. He closed his eyes and mentally sighed. In the distant night sky, Heidi's mountainous demon body had already become a small black. Compared to a truly majestic snowy mountain, both man and demon seemed insignificant. That small black dot sank into the middle of the snowy peak, deep in the snow. A tremor traveled from the distant ground back to the valley, soon followed by a thunderous rumble. Countless years of accumulated snow began to collapse from the snowy mountain. It didn't take long for the snowy mountain to undergo a massive transformation, becoming completely different from before. The black hole created by Heidi also vanished, no trace of it to be found. Just like that, the commander of the front lines of the demon army had vanished. This was a major event that should have shaken the entire continent, but in this deep night, it seemed so insignificant. Whether it was spectacular or bitter, no one saw it, no one cared. The demon lord did not look, because he did not care. When his gaze left the zither strings, the first thing he looked at was the broken monolith, and the second thing he looked at the sparks in the night sky. Then, he once more stretched out his hand. This time, his hand pierced through the sparks and reached the highest point of the night sky. A dragon cry, brimming with anger and unwillingness, came from the sky, and then came to a sudden stop. The deep freeze dragon breath, imbued with endless frost and killing intent, vanished. The black frost dragon that obscured the night sky rapidly shrank, becoming a small black dot. Then, waved by that invisible hand, it flew off into the distant horizon. The small black dot rubbed against the air, bringing with it a dazzling light. It looked like a meteor, and no one knew where it would land in the end. The deep freeze dragon breath vanished, and the rain of swords also paused. Two streams of green light abruptly vanished as Nank appeared behind the demon lord. Her petite body was covered in wounds. Blood had seeped into her clothes, making it impossible to see her original color. With a wave of his hand, the demon lord had killed Heidi, driven away Gigi, and broken this trap. The difference between the two was too great. The demon lord did not even need to use his full strength. His vision, techniques, and cultivation were enough to easily crush them. There was no longer any meaning in attacking Nank. So Chun Changsheng called back all his swords. Several thousand swords whistled through the air above the valley. With a howl, they floated in the air around him, trembling and buzzing. He looked forward, his expression solemn and silent. Whether it was the remnant flames in the garden, the flying ash, or the light drifting down from the night sky, they were all sliced into pieces by the awe-inspiring sword intent. Seeing this scene, a hint of admiration appeared in the demon lord's eyes. He said, "Whether it's your cultivation in the way of the sword, the strength of your divine sense, or the amount of your true essence, you're very good. Let alone the younger generation, even Chun Xuanba, Zhou Dufu, and I might not be stronger than you when we were your age." It was obvious that in the demon lord's eyes, he, Zhou Dufu, and Chun Xuanba were the strongest experts of the past 1,000 years. Unlike what was commonly understood, he did not place Emperor Taizong in this rank. Chun Changsheng slightly leaned forward, expressing his gratitude for this admiration. The remnant flames in the garden illuminated his face. Although his expression was grave, it was still calm, without any panic or fear. Chapter 775. At this time, no one will disturb us. After the demon lord said this, he began to cough. His coughs were like the echoes of a waterfall in a deep valley, very deep and very distant. The mountains and rivers covering his face slightly warped as he coughed. Chun Changsheng looked at him and said, "Sir's injuries are much more serious than they were in Mount Han. Countless years ago, the demon lord had lost to Zhou Dufu in one move and suffered heavy injuries that he had never fully recovered from. That year, he had infiltrated Mount Han precisely to drink Chun Changsheng's blood to treat his injuries. In Mount Han, he had confronted the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, exhausting a great deal of his mental strength. On his way back to Shualao City, he had encountered the White Emperor, who had been silently waiting on the snowy plains for some time. In that heaven-shaking battle, he and the White Emperor had both suffered heavy injuries, which had also indirectly led to the rebellion 2 years ago. Later on, he had been knocked into the abyss by the combined efforts of Black Robe and the demon commander. Although Nank had taken an enormous risk to save him, his injuries had been even more serious. For 1,000 years, he had always been the demon lord. In reality, for 1,000 years, he had always been an injured person, or perhaps a sick person. His current strength was not even 1/5 of his peak. He had seemed confident and at ease when he had waved his sleeve to defeat Heidi, but in the past, would he have needed to use his hand? Crucially, his injuries were so severe that he could die at any moment. So he was in a hurry to find Chun Chang Sheng and eat him. The demon lord indifferently said, "Even if my injuries are even more serious, I still have very few opponents in this world." Chen Changxing knew that this was the truth. Glancing at his sheath, he said, "But right now, you can no longer threaten me." He had already sent an Hua and the deputy general into the Garden of Zhou. Even if he died now, the demon lord could not kill them. This fact allowed him to temporarily stop worrying about Gigi's safety and make his mind even calmer. Tonight, the demons had already lost an expert like Heidi. As long as he completely burned his flesh in his smoke before he died, the demon lord would assuredly die as well. He was the pope, but he was still extremely far from the divine domain. This was definitely worth it to the human race. The landscape on the demon lord's face suddenly became extremely cold, like it had turned from watercolor to ink. "You want to commit suicide?" Looking at the frightened ant crawling out a hole in the charred ground about 3 feet in front of him, Chun Changsheng said, "This is the only way." The demon lord pointed at the string of stone pearls in his hand. "You still have another choice." Chun Changsheng knew what he was talking about, and he shook his head. At the start of the battle, he had imagined that perhaps he could borrow the Garden of Zhou or the Green Leaf World to temporarily hide, but he had already given up on this idea. Firstly, this made it very easy for the demon lord to grasp traces of spatial travel and use them to enter. This risk was not too great for other people, but he was facing the demon lord. It had to be known that many years ago, the demon lord had entered the Garden of Zhou and taken away a heavenly tome monolith. It was probably the broken monolith that Heidi had just used. At this moment, it had already transformed back into the small stone seal tied to the demon lord's waist. Secondly, in Mount Han, he had already confirmed that at such a close distance, passing through space in front of the demon lord was extremely difficult. In the end, Chun Changsheng wasn't willing to take the risk. He could not accept even the slightest risk of being captured by the demon lord. He could only negotiate. Of course, the basis of negotiation was that he truly had the resolve to die and that the demon lord could clearly sense it. Thus, he could not think of using the Garden of Zhou to temporarily hide, not even the slightest thought. The demon lord said, "I won't let you die." Chun Changsheng replied, "I've studied the Taoist canon since I was a child and cultivated the Tao for several years. It was very arduous, but now I can at least guarantee that while I don't know how to come, I know how to go." The demon lord asked, "Even if after you die, I might kill many people to vent my anger?" Chun Changsheng replied, "I've said it before, I've never had the delusion of saving all living beings. I only care about every person I can see. Is that so? Then you seem to have forgotten a few things." In a frenzied gale, a stretcher floated out of the ruins by the lake. With extreme ingenuity, it passed through the awe-inspiring sword array of several thousand swords and landed at the demon lord's feet. The young array master on the stretcher was still unconscious, his dark skin faintly tinged with green, as if he could die at any moment. "This is real, a concrete person that you can see." The demon lord did not even glance at the stretcher, only stared into Chun Changsheng's eyes. As he spoke, the veil of night covering his face gradually darkened, but the landscape seemed to gain some color. Chun Changsheng felt rather helpless. He had originally believed that this negotiation would be like Tang 36 had said before, with both sides raising some conditions and then doing something else. He had not expected that the other side would immediately reveal their bottom line for him to see. He truly was not skilled at negotiation, and he was even less skilled at dealing with such a complex problem while under threat. Fortunately, this complex problem was a multiple-choice question that he could solve by elimination. This question had 4 choices. He could not just watch as the injured person on the stretcher was killed by the demon lord, perhaps even tortured in the cruelest of ways, because he could not bear to. He also could not possibly abandon his sword and surrender, turn himself into a pill, and offer it up to the demon lord. Then there were only 2 choices left. As long as he was not in the final desperate situation, The option of committing suicide and burning his blood could be pushed back a little. Then there was only one option left: unsheathing his sword. This was the activity that had occurred in his mind in a very short amount of time. He had used the simplest method to resolve this complex problem. Unsheathing his sword, fighting, and then dying was very simple. It was much better than not knowing what to choose and spending every day feeling like a year in anxiety. He threw out the dagger in his hand. The dagger's name was Stainless, and it truly was stainless. It was absolutely smooth, absolutely sharp, and the blade could reflect all scenery. The shredded snow in the garden, the drifting flames, and the slightly deformed stars. A streak of light tore through the night sky and shot toward the demon lord. Several thousand famed swords followed, just like a dragon. Nang's pupils constricted at this sight. She very naturally recalled that battle in the Garden of Zhou. At the time, she had fused with the golden-winged Great Peng's body through the soul pivot, and her cultivation had been close to the divine, but in the end, she had still lost miserably to this sword dragon. The current Qin Changsheng was naturally much stronger than before, but the situation had changed. This sword dragon was assuredly not as powerful as it was back then. However, she was still rather worried, because her father had actually still been heavily injured, and also because this sword dragon was clearly different from the sword dragon in the Garden of Zhou. If one looked carefully, one would realize that those several thousand swords were all faintly trembling, concealed and unreleased. The concealed and unreleased here did not refer to sword energy, but sword techniques. The reason those several thousand swords were trembling, giving off the feeling that they were concealed and unreleased, was because Qin Changsheng had still not truly unsheathed his sword. He had given each sword in the night sky a corresponding sword technique, and it was still in the process of gathering momentum. When those several thousand swords simultaneously used their own sword techniques, what sort of power would it have? Chapter 776. Nang's pupils constricted as she gazed at the several thousand swords in the night sky. To use one's spiritual sense to simultaneously control several thousand swords was already an incredible feat, let alone simultaneously using several thousand different sword styles. How had Qin Changsheng done it? At this moment, she finally confirmed that even if Qin Changsheng did not have these swords or any other tricks, just his spiritual sense, true essence, and cultivation in the path of the sword were enough to defeat her. If she did not possess the fastest speed in the world, she might not even have a chance in a direct battle with Qin Changsheng. The Demon Lord was the strongest opponent Qin Changsheng had ever encountered in his life. Against such an enemy, he naturally had to use his strongest moves. The swords in the night sky were the highest level of his sword path, the most complete display. Some of the old swords that had returned to freedom with him from the sword pool of the Garden of Zhou had been sent back to their sex, while others had been given to his friends. For example, Xin Yuan Pa had obtained the Mountain Sea Sword. Zhe Xiu had taken the Demon Commander's Banner Sword. Su Moyu and Mo Yu had also obtained something, and many swords had been hidden by Tang 36 in the Orthodox Academy. He had not taken them away when he left the capital. Besides those old swords that were too old and needed to be nourished by sword intent, he still had around 3,000 swords that could fight with him. These swords had been in the vault sheath for many years, accompanying him day and night, their minds connected. They were as sharp as ever, their might even greater than before. Tonight, the swords reflected the light and scenery in the darkness, silently forming a dragon. They arrived one after the other, yet they were all the same. Their sword intents were equally awe-inspiring, but their sword techniques were all exquisite and extremely difficult to deal with. If Zhu Yi, Ning Shiwei, and those several hundred experts and soldiers were still by the lake, they would definitely have been routed in a single blow. The 3,000 swords pierced through the air, seeming to paint the 10,000 golden scales in the river in the night. The Demon Lord once more revealed a look of admiration as he sighed. The sword is like the person. If you can break into the divine in the future, just how magnificent and magnificent will this sword dragon be? Sighing was regret, regret that such a magnificent sight would never appear, because Chun Changshan would become his food tonight. Admiration was looking down from a higher position, the evaluation and expectation of a virtuous predecessor for a descendant. It was because of calmness. The 3,000 swords were all different. A single zither note from the Demon Lord was enough to easily break through them. His slender and steady fingers gently plucked the strings, emitting a crisp sound. Tonight, the sound of a zither had already resounded several times. Previously, when Chun Changshan's sword array was broken for the first time, it had also resounded. But those were all scattered and fragmented notes that could not form a song. It was more like a prelude or interlude. At this time, the sound of the zither finally became continuous, turning into a song. The song the Demon Lord played was a song to the delight of the autumn wind. What the autumn wind liked were the fallen leaves. The sound of the zither was even clearer than before, blowing in all directions in the night. It was like the autumn mountains, but also naturally scattered, like the fallen leaves themselves. The zither music was released to its heart's content. It was indescribably bleak and austere as it welcomed the sword dragon that was tearing through the night sky. Just like before, the shattered and bright sparks scattered everywhere, illuminating the world and making the sword dragon that spanned between heaven and earth even clearer. The 3,000 swords began to tremble violently. Some of them could not withstand the damage from the zither music and fell down. Some of them could not withstand the force of the autumn wind and flew to the side. The fierce winds stirred, and the zither music suddenly fell into disarray. The sword dragon slightly scattered, as if its scales had been stripped off by an invisible force. Occasionally, a sword would leave. Those swords that were still persisting began to tremble even more fiercely. Some of the weaker swords had even begun to crack. Based on the current situation, before Changshan's 3,000 swords could reach them, they would be destroyed by the zither music. But for some reason, the Demon Lord's expression suddenly became rather grave. This was the first time he had revealed a sense of wariness tonight. At this moment, the sword dragon formed from the 3,000 swords was constantly spitting out sparks in the night sky. He was looking at a certain place. That place was very unremarkable, and the sparks produced by the collision of the zither music and the swords were also very small. However, when they landed in his eyes, they seemed to burn slightly. The trajectory of the sparks had deviated by an extremely small amount from its original trajectory. This deviation was extremely small, almost indiscernible. An ordinary person, perhaps even Chun Changshan himself, would never have been able to see it, but it could not escape the Demon Lord's gaze. The Demon Lord's indifferent gaze could see through the supreme principles of this world. The deviation in the trajectory of the sparks signified that the space in that place had slightly deformed. The distortion of space was because there was an extremely heavy object hidden behind that spark. Everyone knew that the sparks were the friction between the zither music and the swords. Logically speaking, an object that could deform space had to be extremely large, like the entirety of Mount Han. But for that object to be able to hide behind the sparks, it had to be extremely small. Just what object in the world could be so small and yet so heavy? Perhaps this was Chun Changshan's true trump card that he had been hiding? The Demon Lord suddenly waved his hand. The zither strings snapped. The sound disorderly exploded. The ancient zither was instantly destroyed, transforming into countless splinters and broken threads. Those splinters and threads, together with the shattering zither music, shot into the night sky. Countless clear, ear-piercing, or heavy collisions resounded. The sword dragon in the night sky sputtered even more sparks and then gradually dispersed. Before the sword techniques contained within the 3,000 swords could be used, they had been broken by the Demon Lord. The sparks filling the sky seemed to encounter autumn, withering in a few seconds. The scene in the night sky became clear, and some objects could no longer conceal themselves. A very small stone pearl was flying through the darkness towards the Demon Lord. This stone pearl flew very slowly, giving off a very heavy feeling, as if it was being pulled by an invisible force. At the same time, it was pulling at the surrounding world, causing the nearby space to slightly deform. The demon lord had a rather strange expression as he said, "The Garden of Zhou really did fall into your hands." These words were naturally meant for Chen Changsheng. Then, he raised his right hand and pointed at the small stone pearl. Tonight, he raised his hand for the first time, catching the heavenly tome monolith and then smashing High D into a distant snowy peak. The second time he raised his hand, he grabbed the black dragon high in the night sky and threw it even further into the horizon. At this moment, he raised his hand for the third time, his expression even more solemn than the first two times. His movements were very subtle, like he was plucking clouds, but also very grand, like he was plucking stars. With his movements, the stone pearl slowly came to a stop. At the same time, his seal floated off his belt and into the night sky. The seal and the stone pearl quietly stared at each other in a standoff, slightly vibrating and buzzing. The berserk cheese deep within them gradually calmed down. It was like the reunion of old friends, but also like the meeting of enemies, each with their own thoughts. They were silent. Yesterday, I posted on my official WeChat a concept video for the television series Choosing the Heavens. It was very short and not real, but there was a real person in it. Chapter 777. The stone pearl seemed very ordinary, and there was nothing special about the seal. Only an extraordinary expert of the divine domain could clearly sense the violent energy contained within it, enough to overturn the world. Ever since he had infiltrated the Garden of Zhou many years ago, that seal had always been tied to the demon lord's waist, so he was extremely experienced in this. Thus, he could conclude that the Garden of Zhou had fallen into Chen Changsheng's hands, but he temporarily could not understand how Chen Changsheng could use that stone pearl at his level of cultivation. It had to be known that even with his profound cultivation, he still had to carefully deal with it. So how could Chen Changsheng do it? Another 3 stone pearls flew out of the darkness. The world on the demon lord's face was suddenly covered in a blizzard, making it seem incomparably somber. With a thought, the position of the seal in the night sky began to subtly change. A breeze began to blow. The demon lord's chi, as deep as the darkness, became abnormally open and honorable, like a divine being. The position of the seal and the change in his chi fell on the bodies of the 4 stone pearls. This was contact as well as inquiry, communication. The violent chi in the 3 stone pearls also gradually calmed down. The stone pearls and seal floated in the night sky, reflecting the starlight and faintly glowing. They seemed like real stars. Their positions were motionless, seemingly eternal and unchanging, just like a star chart. Even this was possible. Chen Changsheng's mind was stunned by this sight. He felt the oncoming night wind grow even colder, even somewhat bone-chilling. Back then, when I was observing the star charts in the mausoleum of books, I comprehended the wonders of fixing the stars. I didn't think that after more than 1,000 years, I would have the chance to use it for the first time. When he thought of those past events, even the demon lord felt emotional. As he gazed at the stone pearls and seal in the night sky, he seemed to see the future. The heavenly tome monoliths that Chen Changsheng had obtained in the Garden of Zhou were unquestionably his strongest and final trump card, but they had now been broken. In a little while, he would drink all of Chen Changsheng's true blood and obtain so many heavenly tome monoliths. He was confident that the injuries that had entangled him for 1,000 years would be healed in a single day, and he might even break through in cultivation. Then he would return to Xuelao City, kill all those traitors, strike his unfilial son into the abyss, and then ascend to the throne. He would lead the army south, pass through Tianliang, enter the capital, break Mount Li, and reach the southern sea. He would unite the continent, build countless ships, sail through the eastern sea, and descend on the great western continent. He would become the true master of the world. Finally, he would lead the allied forces of the 3 races on an expedition, sweeping through the entire Saint Great Light continent with a mighty momentum, accomplishing an unprecedented feat. Countless scenes flitted through the demon lord's eyes. His tyrannical aura gradually grew. The corners of his lips perked up in extreme delight. He waved his sleeves at the other side of the darkness and easily struck down the last dozens of swords. At this moment, he thought he was about to see the best ending, but he never thought he would see a pair of eyes first. It was Chun Changsheng's eyes, bright and calm, serious and focused. There was no despair to be seen, not even a hint of defeat. Chun Changsheng did not remain where he was and wait for his defeat. From the moment he attacked, he had already left the ground and was charging at the demon lord. Behind the 3,000 swords piercing through the heavens and earth was the heavenly tome monolith, and behind the heavenly tome monolith was his person. He held no sword in his hand, but a letter. A tear had already been torn in the letter. Upon seeing this letter, the demon lord's pupils constricted as an intense wariness welled up in his heart. Tonight, his strength was not at its peak. He was not invincible, but he was still powerful. His level of cultivation and awareness had always been at the highest level of the world. There were only a handful of people that could make him instinctively wary. The great western continent had one. White Emperor City had two. The capital now only had one. Where had this letter come from? And whose hand was it? The most famous letter in the history of the continent was the one between the demon grand scholar Tungus and the Pope of the human race countless years ago. These two most intelligent figures in the world disregarded the blood feud and enmity between the human race and the demon race. In these letters, they discussed many important questions and then published them to the world. Whether it was the Council of Elders in Shuilao City or the imperial household in the capital, they were all deeply concerned and wanted to object, but no one dared to show it, as their statuses were too high. At the time, there was no great Zhou dynasty, and the Taoist faith was still the orthodoxy. The Pope possessed immense prestige and authority, and Tungus was the teacher of several generations of demon lords. What followed was that declaration demanding the heavenly sea that had spread far and wide in the world after the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy 20 years ago. Although it was a declaration, it could also be considered a letter written to the world by the Chun imperial clan and the Orthodoxy's conservative faction. In the last few years, the most famous were naturally the letters Su Li had left behind before taking the Holy Maiden to the other continent. A letter had killed and heavily injured several elders of the longevity sect, broken the sect's great array, and severed a secret path of retreat. A letter had severed Zhu Luo's arm in a myriad willows garden outside Hanqiu City. A letter had spread through the Orthodox Academy about Chun Changsheng's sword intent, had forced back another storms of the eight directions, Wuqiong Bai, and had even fought a battle with the Tianhai Divine Empress Wooden Hairpin Little Phoenix in the night sky of the capital. Other than Su Li, who had written the letter, Su Yurong, who had delivered the letter, and a few people from the Orthodox Academy, no one knew that Su Li had actually left 4 letters to the world. 3 of the letters had already been torn open and used, while the last letter had always been hidden in Chun Changsheng's bosom. He had not used it in the mausoleum of books because between the Divine Empress and the Pope, he did not know what to do. Moreover, even if he had used it, he would not have been able to change the situation. He had not used it in killing Zhou Tong because he was confident. Moreover, this letter was far too important and unique. Using it on Zhou Tong was far too wasteful. The only time he had almost used this letter was when Eunuch Lin had entered the Orthodox Academy determined to kill, and on that night, his teacher Shang Xingzhou had arrived in the snowstorm. Tonight, his opponent was no ordinary person, but the Demon Lord. Against this legend, even legend, Chun Changsheng did not have any hopes of getting lucky. Without hesitation, he used all his techniques. The sword in the Garden of Zhou, the monolith in the Mausoleum of Books, and this letter from Mount Li. The letter suddenly tore to shreds. An invisible sword intent soared up and penetrated the stars. The starlight was suddenly severed, and the sword intent returned to its true form, stabbing straight at the Demon Lord. A soft crack resounded through the night sky. It was like water had been cut in two, like clouds had been cut in two, like the sky had been cut in two. That landscape had been cut in two. That world had been cut in two. That part of the darkness had been cut in two. The layers of mist that had shrouded the demon lord's face for countless years had been forcefully cut apart by that fierce sword intent. It truly appeared between the heavens and the earth. His iron brows that suddenly rose like inky mountains. His eagle eyes that were as cold as a deep pool. The demon lord brought his palms together. It was like two mountains that had sat on opposite sides of a river for countless years had come together. The sword intent that Suli had left behind had been caught in between. A straight and distinct wound had appeared on the demon lord's face. It was between the inky mountains, between the deep pools. So tired just now, I saw that I've already been updating for 9 days. I hope that I can also hold on tomorrow and break through. But I've never done it half-heartedly, and I've even written it more seriously than I did in the past few years. Just like I said to everyone last year, before I upload it, I'll edit it whenever I have time. Yesterday, I looked at the plot of the grand examination and realized that there were many broken words and passages that could have been deleted. Now, I've written it much cleaner. No matter what, progress is always a good thing. Everyone, work hard.